Confirmation. All right. We are live.
Oh God, are we on? I'm not decent.
Oh no. Brad!
Don't listen to me.
No, please. I can't believe you come to work like this. My goodness.
With my mic on and everything.
Oh, this is a terrible co-working experience. Um, so hello. This is your host, Isabel Manalso. I've been your host the entire weekend, so haha. I I hope you're used to me by now, because I'm not going away apparently. Um, so welcome to the 7th stream of our stream weekend here at Hiveworks under the hashtag BeHome. So we have this one today. What the heck does an editor do all day? And then we've got Worldbuilding NOPES right after at 3 o'clock. So definitely tune in for both of those. And excuse me.
Uh-oh.
So just as a reminder, generally, if you're tuning into Twitch, if you scroll down from the viewing window, we've got a couple of fun links that you can check out. So we've got a current sale in our store that's going on right now. So it's spring 2020 as the code. It gets you 10% off. So definitely grab some books and stuff. Now is the time. We've also got 2 Kickstarters running, one for Alice and the Nightmare Book 1 and one for Among Us Book 1, and both are very excellent books. So one is a YA school fantasy story, and the other one is a romance story around the themes of music. So both are definitely worth your time. As always, if you're new to Hiveworks, definitely check out our Twitter and our direct site for a bunch of free comics to read. All our comics are free to read online first and then published as books. So you can, get your preferred format, like digital book, physical book, just reading online. As it's posted gradually, you have all the options. And be sure to also follow Iron Circus on Twitter. They're also currently doing panels under the hashtag PajamaCon. So definitely check that out for more fun content and more creators to discover. So this stream, what the heck does an editor do all day, is essentially a bit of a stream to sort of demystify what editors do and express to people what is our use in the pipeline of creation. Because most big businesses have editors, and no matter the size of the publisher, if they have editors, we tend to pretty much do the same thing. So, yeah, it's pretty easy to break that down if you have some experience, especially if you speak to other editors. And by speak to editors, I mean complain to each other because we have the same problems. So, if you have that, you usually get a pretty good idea of what everybody in the industry is kind of dealing with. Although I have to admit that people that have to deal with online content, like editors that deal with online content, often have their own very specific experience. So we will get into that as well. With me for this stream, I have Brad Brown, who is my co-editor at Slipshine and my co-editor at Hiveworks. So Brad does both, and is also the author of Blaster Nation, which is a completed comic that you can read in full, and the ongoing mature comic Rockcocks, which is not for all audiences, but if you're 18
Yeah.
plus, is definitely a good read if you like that salacious content. And
Happy
also,
to be here.
yay! Also with us, we have Atla Afne. God, I'm sorry.
Every time you try to pronounce it, and every time I just start giggling.
I
I
know.
love it.
This will stay a gag forever.
Oh yeah.
It's all right. I didn't know how to pronounce either of your last names.
It's a language barrier. So Atla is here again. She was in previous streams and has returned to talk about the work of an editor. And Atla actually does editorial work both within Hiveworks and as a freelancer. So there's a lot of experience to pull from, both with dealing with clients directly and dealing with clients in the context of working for a larger, client. So that's going to be pretty fun. So I thought we could first talk about editorial as a whole, as a job. essentially what we do, and then sort of move into like how we work with creators, and then maybe get a little anecdotal and talk about some situations that were really bizarre or difficult or really like charming and inspirational as well, you know? So what an editor does, yeah. And like anybody can chime in at this point. I'm done with the spiel.
Okay. Well, go ahead. It sounded like you were.
Yeah, what an editor does essentially, with most publishers, is that they're kind of in the pipeline. They're kind of the point between what is inbound and what is outbound. So inbound being like when an artist and their agent or an artist alone sort of contacts you to have a work proposed to the publisher you work with. So the editor's job becomes deciding if a work is interesting for that editor, either in its current form or to dedicate some of their time into essentially improving the work or shaping the work to the specific editor, because some editors do have a certain kind of branding in the sense that they're going to want the work to fit a certain type of media to be part of like their library. So essentially they sort of take the work and they receive it and they transform it a little bit and they propose it to their bosses, and if it gets accepted, then the editor's job is to essentially keep production going and keep the pages coming and keep the artists happy and feeling like they're supported until the book is realized, and then the editor basically transfers it to the next department, which tends to be pre-press, which is the preparation of the book for print, and marketing, which is the preparation of the book for promotion. So that is really what an editor does. In essence, it's taking something that is personal and essentially helping to shape it into a product and helping that product to get into the world. And that seems like it's kind of like, that seems like I'm just describing that for like big companies, but that's also the experience for small companies, like
not just books either, but webcomics like what we do.
Yeah, like digital works. Like a good example is the work that we do for Slipshine, which again, to sort of like preface, Slipshine is a mature comic website. So, you know, anybody who's not 18 in the audience, you don't, we didn't tell you, didn't tell you nothing.
Yeah. We're going to keep this all ages, but.
Yeah. But essentially, you know, it's looking for creators and finding them and helping shape the stories to the Slipshine brand, and making sure that the content sort of follows the guidelines that Slipshine wants for the works that we essentially have on their platform, the works that represent us, you know?
Yeah.
Atla, you've worked as a freelancer for a lot of creators to help them actually prepare the works to propose to a big publisher. What's your experience in like being part of that pipeline as an independent editor?
Oh, that's interesting. So first off, you as a freelancer, in thing like you said, like what you're mostly doing is people who don't have like an agent, they don't have like a publisher with them. They're still kind of like very green around art or in terms of their writing, and they effectively aren't just coming to you for like advice on how to like tighten up the plot. They're effectively coming there to like level up their entire skill sets. You know, like usually these are people who, because like once they're agented or once they've got like more industry experience, they don't have necessarily a need to approach like just some freelance editor. You know,
so it's really about like your focus is really on the like, let's make this a product, let's improve you like experience. You're fully trying to shape the artist into being like interesting for publishers all around.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's, I think in my like I worked on, you know, not just comics, but like visual novels and like radio play series and stuff like that. And like throughout my entire kind of like 3 4 years that I've been doing this, I don't think I've had more than a handful of creators who already have like some sort of collective. Like I've had a couple, and I've definitely had more artists that like started with me and then went on to do like really big projects. But generally speaking, those people don't come back because like freelance editing at its core, like you said, is like a waypoint. You know, like it's like step three of like your 100 step journey or whatever, you know? And
So
so it's like,
essentially, after people like, do you after you help people get through stuff, do you have like a proud mama bird watching baby leaving the nest kind of feeling?
well, that's sometimes, yes, like definitely, like there's definitely artists where I'm like, oh man, you were like I knew you when you were just starting out, and now you have like a deal at like HarperCollins, or you have like a Random House series going on, or like also there are definitely creators who are just like on the flip side who aren't necessarily interested in that whole like kind of book publishing, still like want to just get better. And this is the thing that
Yeah,
was most
they
surprising
want
to
their
me.
personal work to have a certain level of quality that satisfies them, even if it's not
Yeah.
necessarily to create a product. Well, it is still to create a product, but it's a product that they personally represent.
Exactly. Like I've had people who are like actively going into it knowing that they're not going to make a lot of money, they're not maybe even not going to make any money, like not even break even. And they still look at getting editorial help as like worth it because to them, you know, like being better at making their little like zine that they have, you know, like in Vancouver, not anywhere else, is still worth it to get better. Like
Oh
because
yeah.
yeah, like it's really interesting because at the end of the day, they just want to be able to express themselves better. And I think with the proliferation of like web comics, there's a lot of people who understand comics as a storytelling choice, but they may not understand like the medium, you know.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, definitely.
I think no matter what your skill level is, you're always going to need that editorial assistance. You always need an extra set of eyes to make sure.
Yeah, sometimes it's just like a buddy that you ask to read your thing. Like, you're asking, like, I remember when beta readers were super popular, and beta readers are just basically like the unprofessional version of editors.
Yeah,
Yeah,
crowdsourcing editors.
and like absolutely, there is that element of just like beta readers are effectively just like or like editors are basically just leveled up beta readers effectively. They do exactly what you would expect a beta reader to do, but just in a more in-depth capacity with a larger.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean, I
Yes.
feel like all editors kind of feel also that, you know, when you become an editor, like when you get hired to do that. I remember when I started editing, everybody was like, "Wow, you're really good at this. Like, did you study like languages or something in school?" And I'm like, "Fuck no." Like, for context, I was an accounting student. Like, as far from art as I could possibly be, but I have always consumed books in an absolutely absurd quantity, like comics and comics through various languages and platforms too, because I have the advantage of being French in origin. So I grew up on French comics, and then as I slowly acquired English, uh, I essentially started adding web comics and, well, English web comics anyways,
Mhm.
and like English comics and, you know, manga as it started developing too, because I remember a time without manga. That's how old I
The
am.
Dark Ages.
Oh god, so bad. I never want to go back. And like all this stuff, sort of like all this like media soup, essentially sort of just created like an extremely good beta reader out of me, and someone who was like really really good at analyzing story and analyzing the capacity of the person in front of me. So a lot of people were like, "Oh, you're like really good at this. Like, what did you like go to school for this?" And I'm like, You can go to school for this?
Yeah,
Nobody
I don't have
told
any.
me.
I never really had any experience either. I was just a basic commentator like anyone else, just making uh little critiques wherever I could for people who wanted them. Obviously, I wasn't one of those like YouTube jerks. Just
Hi, I noticed you have a story, and I have like a weird idea. Let's make this happen.
yeah,
Like those messages.
yeah.
I noticed that you were writing something successful, and I thought I should totally insert myself in this. You
I
know.
And
mean,
I think,
no, go ahead.
uh, yeah, I was gonna say, like, I think like the thing that makes an editor viable, and it's such a simple thing, but it's something that I think a lot of people feel they struggle with, is everyone has the capacity to know whether something that they're watching is good or bad from a personal subjective perspective, but not a lot of people have the ability to like put it
Articulate
into
it.
words.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And as soon as you can do that, you have the ability to be an editor effectively.
Yeah. It's
Like,
we were talking in the other chat how when you start to recognize that something is bad, you get like a weird like you hate everything you do for a while because your brain is like your brain has a like leveled up, but your hand and your like processing power hasn't leveled up yet, so you're still drawing
Uh,
pages and your brain is going like, "Hey, this is crap." But like you haven't gotten to the point where you like can rationalize that you're like, "Oh, it's because I've my artist brain has become more attuned to whatever." So instead you just feel like garbage.
yeah, I know how that is.
Yeah, you're just like your brain is like this is not good, but it doesn't like communicate it to you in a way that's like, oh, it's not good because you're actually learning. It's communicated to you in a way that's like it's crap because you're crap, and you're like, oh,
Uh,
I'm sad now.
okay, so I'm just a writer. I have no art experience at all, but it's that feeling is even worse as a writer because at a point you're just like there's a technical skill to drawing, but with writing it's literally just writing words. And why can't the words just get on the screen?
I mean, I'd argue that there's a lot of technical skill in writing as well. It's just
Yeah,
it's very
but even then
abstract
it's
technical skill, you know.
yeah.
It's not like you can definitely look at art and be like, oh yeah, this like anatomy I've acquired this skill. It's like bing, that little Zelda
Yeah.
music. But for writing, you've acquired all these skills of storytelling and like mise en scène and all that stuff. But it's hard to go like, yeah, I've totally I know how to set a scene. Look at me go. Like it's hard to make that into words, and I think that's definitely like the best editors are definitely people who were writers
Oh
or
yeah, you need that
artists.
experience.
Yeah,
You need to
it's
know where the people you're helping are coming from.
you need to go through that suffering. uh, I,
Yes.
I feel like that's really important, but like to become a good editor I feel you have to be a certain type of creator, if that makes any sense. Like I
I think so.
feel like most of my talent as a creator is adaptive. Like most of the stories I try to do adapt like a fairy tale, or like I definitely work best playing off like materials or ideas. And sometimes I feel like because I focus on that when I write things, um that's part of why I became a really good editor. So sometimes I feel like I'm better at like adapting than actually like writing, which is a weird
Hmm.
feeling. But then other editors I talk to don't necessarily have that. But I still feel like it takes a certain like personality type or interest to become one, if that makes any sense. I don't know how you
Oh no,
guys.
definitely.
yeah, like it takes a couple of things, I would say. First off, it takes a large amount of empathy, um, of people. Like, of all of the jobs that are, at least in comics, like, bless you, Brad.
Oh,
Um,
that was Leslie, my wife.
oh, all right, bless. Um, but I was gonna say, like, there's this sense of like empathy that you need to have that are maybe like at a skill
Oh,
you were
Atla,
at.
you're
Like,
you're cutting out. Can you say that again?
absolutely. I said there's this. You have to have the ability to be empathetic towards other people. And you have to have the ability to like look at somebody who's below your skill level and go, "Here's what you can do. It's okay." Like, because I see a lot of people who like watch people who are maybe not as experienced as them and like get all high and mighty and get on their high horse, and they're like, "Oh, like get on my level, scrub." But you actually have to have the exact opposite reaction. You have to go.
Well, I wouldn't even say it's like being their skill level is below yours. I mean, you're definitely right in that you need that empathy. You need to. It's a lot more than just being like, or just going into it like, this sucks. You just need to change it. You just. It's more like having to basically figure out what they're trying to accomplish, getting into their mindset, and seeing how best you can help them get their view across, their what they're trying to get across.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, and
And
also like the empathy part is also to sort of try to detect emotional distress, because that's something that I feel is not talked about enough. But I feel like as a publisher and an editor, like no matter what the level you're working with, creators, like either it's like direct creators that just hire you to improve their personal work, or creators who are really, really trying to create a product. Often you have a lot of creators who are very stressed right now because
Yeah.
they're trying to
I
fix their work,
couldn't imagine why.
and sometimes they sort of take it out on you a little bit. Like not necessarily in a like swearing at you and yelling at you, although sometimes yes, that does happen. But
Yeah.
so,
the stories I could tell.
oh yeah, I've got some
The
too.
stories we will tell.
But sometimes it's just like inadvertently, because the stress rubs off on you. uh you know it's part of it, and because you're using your empathy right now, you're just absorbing this. Like I've had this one creator where it was a very, very difficult talk, because essentially we were coming to terms with the fact that the story they were working on just wasn't working with their identity anymore. Like their identity had changed a lot. They had transitioned, and a bunch of other stuff had happened in their life that made it so that the story wasn't working anymore. So we were talking about like how to finish this within a year, and just the grief that the author was feeling, but also the relief they were feeling, was kind of like being transmitted from them to me, because they were like very jittery and very emotional in the talk. And after like the editorial meeting, and that was like a super early one at like 10 o'clock in the morning, so like initially my plan was to like do that meeting and have my full work day. But then afterwards I was just like, I'm gonna take a nap. Like I was just emotionally
It's
drained.
draining. Yeah.
Yeah, it's having
Uh,
that empathy and having that connection with people to help them work on their thing. Because if you're a good editor, you always have to connect with people and you always have to be emphatic. And it is emotional labor, you know. Sometimes it's fun.
yeah.
Sometimes you're just talking to people and you're just like, and then the robot does this, and you're like, yes. Like sometimes that's the meaning. But sometimes it's like really hard, and and sometimes you gotta talk to people who quit, or you gotta talk to people who aren't happy with how things are going, or you talk with people who are not happy how things are going and they blame you for it. uh,
Yeah.
like there's all sorts of things. um
Yeah.
and it's
I
like,
actually. Oh,
you
no,
go.
go ahead.
No, I
Oh,
was I was done.
Oh, I was just gonna say I had a story similar to that with someone on Slipshine where we were trying to get the story out, but they were just having so many difficulties with it, and I would keep giving them advice, but they just weren't able to incorporate it. And uh, I mean, this never got to a point where like we were just yelling at each other, or just it was more like I would offer some advice and they would ignore it and try it a different way. But it did get frustrating. But by the end of it, the comic just wouldn't work the way they intended it for it to. Like characters would come off creepy when they're supposed to be endearing, stuff like that. Uh, but it turned out the artist was just going through such an emotional period, and the only reason they weren't listening to the advice was because they weren't feeling this comic anymore. So eventually we just had to scrap it, and we just worked on something brand new together, and they're a lot happier with it, and everything's like just fine now.
Yeah,
Sometimes that's all it takes.
there's like a being the artist's shrink aspect a little bit. That's
Yeah.
there's also there's people asking questions in the chat, so I'm just gonna like relay them.
Okay.
I don't have the chat or the Twitch open because otherwise my audio just lags a lot. So
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So
please
I'm
feel
just
free.
gonna pass a few of the questions. So someone asks, are we going to be streaming regularly? Yes, these are going to happen probably every 2 weeks after this. Not in like packs of 8 like this one, but just like one every 2 weeks or so. Other question, want to know how an editor who is also a creator doesn't just become too critical of their own work?
Oh, you don't. It just happens. You just have to live through it.
Yeah, I'm so critical of Namesake, and I think it's not so much about not being too critical of your own work, because you will be. Like, you can't take those goggles off. They're there forever. Like, they're strapped to your face now. The problem is that usually when you're really critical of a work that a creator is doing, and critical in the sense that you're trying to help them do something, that you're asking them questions, not critical in the sense that you're destroying something. Good critique, not bad critique, but
yes,
you're critical about your own work, but you don't have the space to process the critique, because when you're criticizing an artist, they have the space to take what you said and, you know, process it through a different brain. But while you're an editor and you're critiquing yourself, it's just like a loop in your brain. That's why, like earlier, I was talking about how like it gives you this weird emotional like down where you're like, oh, this sucks. Maybe it's a me problem. Like, you're not thinking about it in terms of like, I could improve stuff. This is where I find having a partner or working with partners really helpful, because sometimes I'll go up to my partner and be like, I feel like this sequence is bad, and she'll be like, no.
But no, you're right. Editors need editors. Everybody needs an editor.
Yeah, everybody needs like a creative friend who can talk you down from these and just really help you. Like, it's crazy. You don't have to have like a professional editor with like a monocle or whatever, but
no,
you always need a friend. The more you work in isolation, the worse it is, you know?
And editors are your friends.
I was gonna add to that and say like when I'm writing a graphic novel right now, and it gets so bad that like I pre-edit some of the things in terms of just like, no, does this actually work? No, I think that this is introduced too early, stuff like that. So I actually include that for the creative team, like my own like kind of pre-edits. So like, no, you can't ever like undo that. But I think one thing that can help, and this is something like another thing that I was gonna mention, is most readers need to see the beauty in broken stories, or in like imperfect stories, or like imperfections in general.
Oh yeah.
Like I was reading, I'm not gonna say which comic because it's like relatively new and I don't want to step on toes. Mm-hmm. I was reading a comic that came out like a year or two ago by a relatively big publisher, and it's awful. It's like really, really bad. And fundamentally
okay, so
doesn't
you're just going like, ew. That's why you're not saying any names.
But like it's just like fundamentally doesn't work. And every page that I was reading it, I found new things that was working, and I was genuinely like engaged and like enthralled by how much it didn't work. In a certain way, like the people who.
Oh, go ahead.
Like, in a certain way, like. Maybe not enjoying so bad it's good, but like rather just like seeing like, I understand what you were going for here, and I can see the effort, and even when it doesn't work, I can still see the effort. And I think like kind of having that mindset sometimes when it comes to your own stories, like understanding, yeah, maybe it doesn't work right now, but you still have a draft, you still have 2 drafts to like polish it up.
Oh yeah.
And so like being kind of kind to other people's flawed work when it's not being like openly like malicious. or what have you.
Yeah, I mean, all work is inherently flawed. There is no perfect story. Like, my first comic is kind of, you know, it's kind of like it's glittery trash because that's what I want it to be, you know. Sometimes the flaws are good. You don't have to, like, editorial is not so much about fixing stuff, it's more about figuring out what flaws are charming.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
And like that's one thing is like it's like there's a ton of
I mean, except for grammar, we definitely fix grammar.
Most of the time, hopefully.
That does have a right and wrong way of doing it.
But like there's a ton of stories that, you know, like people release, like movies, video games that are like inherently just like an action fest story, or like a basic ass rom-com, or like a boilerplate like drama film. And like people may have mixed opinions about it, but the author or the creator usually did exactly what they set out to do. Like sometimes you just want to make a boilerplate story and nothing else.
Yeah, sometimes you want to be a basic bitch, and that's fine. We need basic bitches. Like, sometimes you're gonna be freaking Isaac Asimov, and sometimes you're gonna be like Joss Whedon.
Yeah, I mean, hell, when I made Blastination, it was I just wanted to do a slice of life, but with terrible, horrible nerds.
Yeah,
And
like
that was it.
I wanted to draw fairy tales and hot wizards. Okay, just
admirable.
Yeah, get off my back. So next question. This one is actually really funny. How do you become an editor? What qualifiers are needed? Well, to be honest, a bunch of people who work as editors should not be editors.
No.
So I feel like how to become an editor is kind of like I applied to the job. So I guess the question is more like how to become a good editor, because how to become an editor period is basically just like if you see a job opening, apply to it.
Mm-hmm.
How to become a good one? It's like Atla was saying earlier, you have to cultivate your empathy, but you also have to cultivate like your analytical brain, and you also have to cultivate your culture. Like, you have to read a lot, and you have to read about reading, and you have to go to classes about writing and about reading and about everything, and like publishing, and it's like you have to really just sort of work on your knowledge, and not just like reading the classics. Like, you can read classics all day long, but I think being a good editor is also keeping on top of what is being made recently. Like, I read so many, like, every time there's like new books on a monthly basis, so like New York Times bestsellers, I'll probably read half of those just to be like, what's the trend right now? And to sort of get interested in trends, not just content wise, but also trends like on television, trends in cover design, trends in what people like. Like, when Adventure Zone came out, suddenly D&D was like in all the books and comics, you know? Trends happen, and you kind of have to study what they're doing and study why people like it. Like, right now there's a return to the 80s. Why do people like the return to the 80s? Why do people like the aesthetic? These are like questions you should know, or like ask yourself. You don't necessarily have to have like the best freaking answers to this, because again, you're not like a genius. You're just some guy trying to analyze media. But the point is that you always have to sort of do it. Like, if you meet an editor that's like and I've met guys like this, and like, this editor is just like, ooh, the purity of the work, the I don't read books written by women or books that have been published in the last year. Like, editors like that, like, fuck those guys. They're the worst. I don't like those guys. They don't publish anything that I want to read, you know? You really need someone who's got, like, a finger on the pulse creatively, I think. As soon as you stop being interested in, like, what the young people are doing, but also being interested in, like, the history of literature and how things became what they are, because everything cycles back, you know? Like, there's a reason the most popular comics on the internet right now are adaptations of older shit. Like, Lore Olympus is a Greek myth. It's got a couple centuries under its belt. Yes, it is adapted for modern audiences, but it remains based on old stuff. You have to have that culture to be able to really help someone.
That ancient Greece throwback period.
Yeah, look, the ancient Greece throwback period comes back every decade. I swear to God.
People so nostalgic.
Yeah, everybody.
I would also say. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go.
Okay. So I would also say that one of the fundamental qualities of an editor is understanding.
Oh, you cut off there.
You cut off.
Do I keep cutting off? That is so annoying. Okay,
I
am
think
I back on?
I think you only cut off if you move away from the mic. Just stay really close. Develop a relationship.
Just stay really close. Here we go.
Discord motion sensor.
So, I'd say that one of the most important things that you can have as an editor is an understanding of like, a project is not for you. There's a lot of projects.
Oh my God! Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of projects that deal with sensitive topics when it comes to like race, when it comes to gender, sexuality, and like colonialism, and a lot of stuff that even if you're interested, you may not be able to tackle. And even like in scenarios where you're like, oh, this author, like for whatever reason, like for me, like I sometimes try to budget with people who are like a little bit lower class or don't have a lot of money. So a lot of like young people of color telling their very, very personal stories come to me because I'm the only relatively affordable one, like in their general area. And so like my like personal rule is if they're explicitly talking about, like their expression on like, or their personal feelings on like race or whatever thing I don't have personal experience with, I just kind of leave that alone. I may make some suggestions like, hey, I noticed you have this thing that's really interesting about your own diaspora as whatever, like a Latino American person. Maybe we can develop that a little bit more, or like we can go a little bit in that direction. That seems really interesting. But outside of that, you have kind of a responsibility to not with stuff that like that is so deeply personal and rooted in things that you don't know about.
Yeah, you want it to shine through, but you don't want to interfere, basically.
I also notice sometimes like there's this weird situation where you have a creator, usually not someone that's from the background that they're trying to express, but sometimes you have a creator who's like, ooh, I really want to talk about like, I want to make a comic about, the Queen of Hawaii, which is like a good topic and someone should make it. Please, an artist from Hawaii, make this. I want to read this so bad. I will edit you for free. Like, seriously. But like sometimes you have someone who brings up a topic and you're reading about it and you know that you yourself as an editor like are not appropriate to edit the work, but then you notice that this creator you're working with is actually like in terms of like social literacy is actually at a lower level than you, so actually you're the perfect person right now to actually tell them that they don't know shit. It's a weird situation, but it has happened to me several times where it's like, oh no, oh baby, no.
And there is that flip side where you realize that they are, like,
they have more social literacy than you, and then you're like, you're like, oh man, I want to talk to you so much, but I don't want you to pay me for it. Like I just want to have a discussion.
Like, and what I would add to that then is there's a ton of freelance editors that we could all name off the top of our heads that may be equipped for that. Like, so if you want to be a good editor, a good thing to do is like collect a little curated list of like other editors that have like lived backgrounds that you don't have. So if somebody's like, I have here, like my experience about being a Black woman in like rural America, I'm like, I have the perfect editor for you who could do that. Who actually is able to tackle that topic in a very, very human way.
Yeah, keep a list of your colleagues and also make sure that your public site has a list of what you've edited so people can be like, oh, everything you do is YA. Here's my gritty adult 18 plus, whatever. Maybe not. Yeah, it's good to know who you're dealing with,
That's also just a good point, just as an editor, not being afraid to, seek out a second opinion to help with your own, to figure out how to help the person you're editing. Because, I mean like I said, I'm not an artist, and so I can if somebody presents me a picture and it just looks completely wrong, like anatomically, I can grasp like something's not right here. But as someone with no art experience, I can't pinpoint exactly what. So I have Issa over here.
And then I redline it all, and then I let Brad deal with it. So yeah, it's essentially, to become a good editor, it's like knowing your limitations, having empathy, learning from people,
Yes.
having like your colleagues and having a really good relationship with your colleagues. Like any editor who has competition with other editors like sucks. Like it doesn't matter if you work for companies, even if the companies are like intense, like Capulet and Montague kind of relationship, like doesn't matter. You're friends with the editors. You're not friends with like the marketing department or whatever, but the editors, you
Oh
guys
yeah.
are pals. Like you have to have that relationship.
We're
Uh
your friends. We're here to help.
yeah, united. So next question, would y'all say that the job has changed from like correcting grammar and spelling to like being aware of social more, checking in on folks, etc.? To be honest, the job of a publisher and an editor specifically has always been artist management.
Yeah.
Back early, like in the early days, editors did all this, and you also had artist managers that were like on the publisher payrolls and stuff like that back when everything was in print and the internet didn't exist yet and stuff like that. In the 80s and 90s, there was actually this trend of author veneration, like the Stephen Kings and stuff like that. So, and there was a lot of cutbacks as well. So during that time period, editors started to get perceived as being useless, because that was also like an argument for editors to actually just cut them. And because there was a lot of offers, there was bestsellers that refused to have anybody look over their scripts, which is, you know, how we got a lot of Stephen King novels. Uh, Essentially, like there was this idea that editors were just like grammar checkers, but that's not even their job. Like usually you have people in publishers that are proofers. Proofers are people who check grammar. That's not even like an editor's job. But it just sort of became the illusion that editors are only there to either destroy your work or correct grammar. So the job never changed. The perception of the job actually changed. And more now, as big companies are really sort of moving into publishing, and publishing is becoming like an IP investment more than just a book investment, editors are just getting even more work than before, because the artist management becomes like way more important, and the work that's being created has to be farmed out for adaptations and stuff like that. So editors get a lot more work and a lot more expectations, because you sort of become the relay between the big publishers, like board of directors shitty ideas, and the artists who get the consequences. So you have to become sort of the pipeline for that. So the job has like never changed, but has become more intense and has become extremely devalued, which is really sad. And I feel like part of the devaluing is because they were trying to cut them and pay them less and stuff like that. They were actually talking about how like how like part of the cuts was because of like comics, like DC and Marvel. They had too many editors, and they were trying to like get rid of them or something. There was like a whole like smear campaign or something. I read an article about it, but I can't remember any of it. So, you know, I'm just telephoning this information that I read, but there was definitely like a lot of ridicule of it. But the job has never changed. Like being being like this person who manages artists and goes to fetch manuscripts and all that stuff has always been part of the job. Before I worked at Hiveworks, I worked for a French publisher, and I was basically like the bitch level editor, like, because you had senior editors, you had under that you had like the normal editors, under that you had like the minor editors that were essentially the assistants, and under that you had the assistants. So I was like assistant, I was minor assistant editor. That was like my title, which means that I was everybody's bitch. So my main job would be to go collect manuscripts.
Ooh.
And check it to see if an offer was live. And one time I turned up as an author's home and they were just like dead drunk in the entrance. So that was fun.
Oh wow, so these were like actual like house calls?
For some of them, yeah. Some of them they would come
Oh
to the
wow.
office and you had to like greet them and give them coffee and check up on them, like entertain them for a little bit. That's why they would always pick like very young women for the bitch level because they're like, oh, it's cute. There's a young lady like saying hello. Yeah, yeah. I know.
Oh, that sounds terrible.
Yeah, it's like high heels were mandatory. It was really weird.
Oh no.
So not a good
This sounds
job.
like Mad Men.
It. I mean, yeah.
I'm
Like
not saying it's not that.
yeah, it was. But yeah, sometimes they would come to the office and you just have to greet them and sort of like keep them entertained and talk about the manuscript they got and make sure that there's everything before you pass it on. That was like the bitch level. For a lot of publishers, the bitch level doesn't exist anymore, so editors have to do like everything from bitch level to like head editor level, which is like straight up staff management work.
Yeah.
It's just hard. So your editor works really hard, and I think we realized that too when offers go off the rails. Like I'm thinking about J.K. Rowling a lot and how like she real dumb on Twitter. And I always felt like, based on reading the Harry Potter books back in the day and rereading them like as an adult, I always felt that she's always had these bad ideas. It's just that back in
Yeah.
the day she had an editor that like freaking pulled that out of the oblivion and removed the worst of it. And
Oh
like
yeah.
whoever that editor was, they like deserve a basket of muffins for essentially helping invent YA.
Yeah. I mean, George Lucas is also the famous example.
Oh my god, yes.
Yeah.
This is why editors are so important. Without us, you get the prequels.
Oh yeah. Well, his editor was his wife too. Like it's often
Really?
yeah, the person who edited
Huh.
the movie, who did the cuts for the movie, was George
Yeah.
Lucas's wife or girlfriend at the time, and like she only
I
got
didn't know
credit for that recently. So
Oh, that's why.
the original, yeah, the original movies being that good were like, and this was like unpaid work. I don't think she was like a formal editor. She just did it because she was like, this is trash. I have to fix it.
They're gonna make him a car salesman?
I think a lot of especially in comics publishing, a lot of the editors that we perceive as the bad ones, and like I think a
Okay.
lot of them are, like basically writers that haven't gotten their they feel as their just desserts, and so they just like move into editing. And I mean, like I started as a writer and then couldn't get work, so I went into editing, and then it became something that I was known for. So there are definitely like positive cases of that, but there's also people
Yeah.
who like basically own like a publisher or own like a department or whatever, or like are oversee a department, and then they effectively just control kind of that beat of whatever the writers are doing. And there's a couple of examples, like even at DC. I think it was like I think it was Countdown to Infinite Crisis or Countdown to Final Crisis, where it was just
Oh
like
god,
a
that shit.
mess. Yeah, it was just like gigantic mess. And the rumor is that it was a fairly substantiated rumor, I think, that like it was effectively just the editors playing with the story in a way that like wasn't really appropriate in terms of how the work should have been split. And there are some cases like where I've had to actually intervene with examples like that, because at like DC and Marvel, they don't do it like we do, where it's like, like I work with the artist or the writer, and they work with their artist, and we kind of have this little triangle of trying to figure out what to do next. At like DC and Marvel and a lot of like IP focused market or like publishers, they have like the writer hands in the script, and then the editor says, okay, the comic will be with you in like a couple of months, and then they take it from there and effectively independently work with the artist. There are plenty of examples of this, and there's actually an example. Gail Simone wrote an issue of Plastic Man where like there was there's a moment where the character is dressing up as Harley Quinn because Plastic Man can like bend himself into whatever form he wants to, and he bends himself into Harley Quinn, and she has like a trap like bulge or whatever, like a trans woman bulge.
No.
And there's like a small controversy uprising on the Twitters, and I go up to Gail and I'm like, Gail, what the fuck is that? And we have a conversation, and at a certain moment we both realized there's been a fundamental misunderstanding, that she didn't actually know this was in the final page. She didn't, like, she had not written this into the script itself.
That's the issue also, like, for stuff like DC or Marvel, because the editor's job is to essentially manage the entire team, like penciler, inker, colorist, writer, and the editor's not necessarily informing the other party of what's going on. Like, sometimes it's like, okay, we paid you, you're done with the writer, and they don't come back. So, like, you don't always get, like, that happened to me too. Like, I wrote something for a one issue thing, and when I saw the art, I was like, oh no. Like,
yeah. There's even more egregious examples at, like, I forget what the publisher that publishes like licensed Disney comics is, but there was one writer who did like a Big Hero 6 comic, and they had gone through they had gone through the entire comic with just like, and just rewritten effectively the script fundamentally.
I heard about that one.
Yeah, so like that totally happens. And like even when I've been working with like smaller or like hive sized like publishers on the side, like if I have an artist that hands in artwork and there's a writer who wrote it independently, me and the writer go through the artwork. Like they're both part of kind of like, so I'll hand in my edits and then the writer will be like, I noticed this isn't quite what I was going for. Can you change the expression here? And like even where I'm like, oh, this character the expression should maybe be a bit different. They might come in and be like, no, that expression shouldn't be like the way you're describing it. You can change it like this, but not what you're saying, because that's not in line with what the character is saying. All of that to say, like, the writer can be much more like at the mid tier where it's not IP focused. Usually the artist and writer work in tandem with the editor, versus this more like kind of corporate angle of like, okay, you're done.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I find the okay, you're done is actually a negative. Like back in the day, DC editors were really just team managers, and everybody would sort of work into the office because artists would be hired like for life. It's just going to a full freelancer forces the editors to do way more management for communications to be optimized, but they also have a fuck ton of writers and artists, so they don't have time. Like, it's a whole issue. We only got a couple of minutes left, and there's still a few questions, so I'm going to try to get us to go through as much of these as possible. How do you get an editor? Well, usually when you get hired, like usually if your IP gets bought by a formal publisher, you will be assigned an editor. If you're not working for a publisher of any size, either a small one or a big one, you can find one that is a freelancer like Atla. Usually there's people looking for work on Twitter or something like that, so you can find them that way. But if you're working like in a formal setting, you don't so much get one as you are given one. However, I think it's important to note you don't necessarily choose the editor that's assigned to you, but if you are working with a publisher, it's good to sort of note, like, if you're working with a lead editor or a team editor, because sometimes your editor won't necessarily be good for you. As we mentioned before, it's good for editors to know when a project is not for them, although sometimes an editor doesn't necessarily have the sort of self-awareness to realize this, or you don't jive personality wise. So sometimes it's good to sort of know like who your editor's boss is in case you have problems with them.
Speak to their manager.
Yes. Definitely, like, it's someone helping you shape your vision, and having someone that, like, you're not necessarily going to get an editor that you're going to be best friends with. But like, if you have someone that like every meeting is conflict, then maybe there is a problem,
Yeah. And there's also been definitely cases that I've seen where people are like trying to find a publisher. This is one of the reasons why it's important to get an agent, because the agents will usually know kind of on an individual level what the editors at the big publishers they're interested in shopping your product or your IP with are like. So like I've seen examples where an agent is talking with an artist and the artist is like, "Oh, this publisher has sent us an email, is really interested." And the agent goes, "No, I've talked with that editor. They have no idea what they're doing. And I don't think they're right for us, so let's move on to something else." So like being able to be
Yeah,
agented or being able to
agents is like the sister job to editors. So if you are interested in publishing, traditionally, definitely get an agent. Atla is right. Get an agent. Agents are great. As an editor, do you have any specific advice to artists about communication that can help people in the editor's seat? Honesty, like, I feel like a lot of artists, when we give them feedback, they either feel like we're like, I don't know, like we're being mean or being too critical, or they're just dismissive, or they're like squishing their feelings down and they're not talking about it. Like, we have to be emphatic and honest, and you have to be emphatic and honest too, and like realize that we're like a person in front of you, and if you don't talk to us, we can't help. Like, I've had issues before where a creator has had problems for a really long time with the story they were dealing with, and essentially they would send me an email that's like, here's a list of all my problems, and if this doesn't get fixed in a week, I'm quitting comics forever. Like, you can't put
Oh
me in
yeah.
that position. Like, I can't help you that fast. And you know, it takes me 48 hours to check my emails, so by the time I actually look at the email, it's like I'm down to 5 days.
Yeah.
yeah,
Sometimes, no matter how nice you try to be, it still doesn't work.
yeah.
But I think, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Oh, sorry about that. I was just gonna say real quick is like also in the pipeline, like even the most indie like projects or some sort of structure in which things should be done of like writers that come up to me and they're like, I have this idea for this, story, whatever. Here's the script, and I go, okay, let's do this. And then like 2 weeks later, they're like, by the way, I've started working with an artist to start drawing it. And I'm like, no, but you hired me to tear this to shreds so you could rewrite it. Like, and that's like
Slow down,
literally
buddy.
busted. Yeah, like it's literally busted projects open or like broken them for like weeks at a time because they didn't understand that when I edit it, I have to like actually tell you what's wrong with it and not just give it my stamp of approval.
I think some people do just want that from an editor. And
Yeah.
if we don't give that, they get very resentful. So definitely, like, be honest about your feelings, and like, I guess always be aware that like we're here to help you. Like, that's why I was saying earlier that you get assigned an editor, and if you're not happy with an editor, definitely be open about the fact that you're not happy with them or they don't seem to understand your work, because then you can talk about, okay, so what I'm getting from this is that you feel I don't understand you. Let's talk about why. Because you're trying to work with someone who's essentially, it's in the best interest of an editor to create a work that's good, because if it's a work that's good, it sells, and if it sells, the publisher gets to live another day and you get to have a book. Like, nobody in this team is trying to create something bad. So,
Right.
you know, the editor's always there to help you. If you feel, if you're always defensive when an editor's talking to you and you feel like an editor is never here to help you, then that's not the right attitude to have coming in.
Yeah. I mean, just like don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to negotiate, try to figure out the best compromise to get your own vision across versus what the editor themselves thinks needs to happen. Just try your best to talk it out and figure out the best direction for this story or this art or anything to go.
Yeah, and sometimes the editor, they suggest things that you don't necessarily like, but maybe there's a reason. You could just ask them to explain it deeply. Like sometimes there's some choices that are done for like marketing reasons or IP marketability reasons or just identity of the publisher reasons. Like, or even just because if you put this in, it bumps the book up an age group, and that means that it's gonna like ruin all the sales pre-marketing they've already done. Like, if you promote a book to be a middle school thing, but then the artist comes along and it's like, oh, I really want to put this scene in, but this is a scene that you know that it means that every school who buys the book is gonna send it back. Like, they're gonna try to talk you down from it or try to transform the scene so you have a new scene that has the same kind of emotional beat but not the same content. Like, the editor is here not just to make sure your story is good and that you're happy, but also to make sure that your story is well received by readers and by entities that want to purchase it. Because at the end of the day, the editor knows what the product should be, and you know what your story is, and you kind of have to like have those different things sort of mixed together.
Yeah.
So everybody can survive and get paid, and that's fun.
We're all just trying to survive.
We're all just trying to get paid.
like especially in comics, it's a lot. It's a lot more stingy about like how much you can, like what you're able to do in terms of like or something like that. Like Coraline is worked and was able to thrive because it was words and it was harder to detect how scary it was. But something like a comic where you can just immediately visually see that it's not appropriate for like 8-year-olds or whatever.
Well, they did make Coraline as a comic, and it was terrifying. Like, the movie is so much tamer. Like, the movie really is, like, freaking chill compared... Like, the comic just... They picked an artist that had a really, really kind of spooky style, too. So they just have that scene in the basement where, like, her ghost dad is, like, pulling out of the earth to drag her down, and I'm like, what the fuck?
But that's because it then managed to succeed under the reputation that it was so scary despite its age range. Like, if it had come out as a comic originally, it would have been regarded as like a big, what the fuck is this? And then it would have been cast away. But because it was already really, really successful, it was allowed to be like that.
I think another example, like, since we're talking about Neil Gaiman too, is because there was the book Neverwhere, which, like, as a book is fine. But then they had the comic, and the artist they pick with for the comic is just like, ooh, it's just not right for this comic. Like, it's not a bad artist. Like, this is not me going like, this artist is terrible. Like, they draw fine, but I wouldn't have picked this artist for this for multiple reasons. Like, oof, no. And I think they picked the artist because, like, it was an artist who was popular in, like, superheroes or something during the gritty superhero age, because that's really the style. It's, like, gritty, superhero-ish mood. But it just doesn't work. And there's so many unfortunate mistakes in the character designs, too, that I'm not going to get into because we basically have no more time left. But yeah. Yeah, that's a strong point that Atla brought to the table. We have one last question in the thing. It's a really big one, so I don't know if we can get through this in 5 minutes, but we'll try.
We'll try.
How has editing webcomics differed from, like, editing books for a big publisher, or is there no difference? To be honest, I think there's a big difference because you're not producing products for the same kind of consumption. So, because your job as an editor is to sort of create a product, you're obviously not going to approach both at the same time. Although there's some crossover, but yeah, you're not creating the same kind of product. One is for people to consume on a weekly basis and then make a book from, and one is to create a book that people have to buy not really knowing what's in it. Like, it's completely different.
I have to imagine the rate of production really changes how you would go about editing. I haven't actually... I've edited a couple of books, but they were originally webcomics, so...
And, like, you probably have the biggest experience between, like, traditional publishers and webcomics. What do you think?
Oh, there's a big difference. Not to a hugely extreme degree. Like, it's still the same kind of general process, but it is very much like a time constraint, like Brad said. So when you're doing web comics, and when I'm doing like an average Hiveworks project, what I'm usually checking in is like, hey, how are we feeling? Are we okay? Do you need me for anything? You know, project management, yada yada yada. You know, like you have this amount of time to do this. Let's see if you can make that deadline. Otherwise, we'll make a new deadline. Stuff like that. When I do print comics or comics that are primarily made to be printed, is very much just like you have this much time. I think I can maybe use this trick to get you to work a little bit faster or give you extra time or something like that. Developing stuff like that. So like one thing that I sometimes do is if a realistic goal is like for like because you have to be like a middleman between the publisher and the artist is if the artist says I can do this, you know, like 100 pages, 200 pages in 2 months, then I'll give the publisher 2 months and 4 days or whatever. Like as an example, like as
No,
a
no,
as a fake
you like double it. Anyways, like if an artist is like, I could do this in 2 months, you're gonna be like, all right, you have 4.
exactly like you create
Because you never know what the
some
fuck is gonna happen. There's always something. Like it's never nothing.
yeah.
It's always something.
And it's like it's a different crowd. It's a different like type of person. They're usually there's a less chance of them being like you know like heavily marginalized, which means that you're dealing with a different type in general.
You're cutting out again, Atla. You might want to repeat that last
Ah,
part.
here we go. Yeah, so you're dealing basically with like when it comes to print publishing, you're dealing with a different kind of people. You're dealing usually with like less marginalized individuals than in like webcomics because webcomics you can just print it for free, so there's less of a barrier for entry. And so you're often the type of people you're negotiating with or the type of people that you're talking to and like requesting edits from are completely different and elicit different reactions. Like they tend to because they feel that time pressure, so they'll usually get a little bit more stingy. Like you might get more stingy because you feel that time pressure as well, you know.
Everybody's just pressured. Yeah, webcomics are hard. Like I always tell creators like some stories and some creators are just better for a webcomic, and some stories and some creators are better for print. Like sometimes if you quote unquote fail as a webcomic or fail in print, it doesn't mean that your comic is bad. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to flourish if you switch sides. And some people do switch sides, and some people should. Like, they're very different production times, and they require very different stories. Because what is marketable in print and what is marketable online is completely different. Like, I think it's important to be self-aware of your work. And I think especially if you hire a freelance editor, that editor is going to be like, this would work in print or this would work online. And that's part of why like being sort of attuned to the media pulse is like important.
I mean, even with webcomics, even just as simple as like the schedule of your release, like
yeah,
can affect both the storytelling and just how well your comic is received. If people like it in one big chunk, or if they need
even
smaller
the
updates
formatting.
weekly.
Like some people like they have stories that if they publish it on webtoons and like a scroll down where it's multiple like pages per update, it works really great. But then other stories, if you do that, it really sort of ruins the pacing. I think because there's this idea, especially on the internet, because of the low barrier of entry that Atla was mentioning, I think there's this idea that like you could just do your work in any way possible, and what's important is to get it out there. But it sort of makes it so that people stop sort of considering medium and appropriate publishers for the work. They just want to get the work out there. Like they're hungry for this.
Yeah.
But you know, back when there was only print publishers, to match up a publisher's collection was a huge important point that would often determine who you would send your manuscript to. And I think because in this age where media is all over the place and people are all over the place and they're hungry for success, it sort of removed this idea that you have to sort of think about format and think about distribution and think about who you're trying to connect to. And I think it's important to sort of bring people back into that mindset, because if you create your work thinking about your readers and thinking about how you want to distribute it, you put less pressure on yourself because you're essentially paving the path to your success a bit more directly. And also you're like having a self-awareness that what you're creating at the end of the day, it has to incorporate readers, because readers are the last step of like the identity of a piece of art. Readers give the identity of the piece of art, you know, the capacity to inspire and endear. So to not think about distribution and to not think about how you want to reach your audience at all is essentially a flaw. So like in this age of like just get it out there, it's important to sort of bring back the idea of like, but how do you want to get it out there, and does that work for you, or does it just make you feel like shit, you know?
Yeah.
I just wanted to cap that off. Like, I have both talked to, been part of projects, and seen artists and creators very clearly want to release it for themselves and like want this kind of like following or want people to engage with it, but don't want to actually engage with what it means to release it to the general public. That there's a difference between making something just for yourself that's never meant to be released and something. I think there is that kind of... Oh, did I cut out?
Yeah.
Oh, drat.
But just for that last part, you know, something that was meant to be really done for yourself or released to, and then you cut there.
Oh, sometimes like things are like, there's a difference between what's meant to be released for you and what's meant to be released for the general public. Like, and I think a lot of people want their work to just be held to like this kind of limelight and not to be criticized and not engage with the fact that their work has an effect on like the world, or at least the readership that they have, but still want the praise for having an effect on their readership.
Yeah, well,
like,
it's sort of this idea of like every work that's being disseminated gets treated as a professional commercial work. Like if I post the comic on Twitter, it's considered by readers as content, like, because it is content because I posted it publicly.
Yeah.
But you know, and then you have a lot of creators who are like, it's not because I published it that I want people to react to it. But then it's like, then why did you publish it? Like, I feel it's this idea that if you're putting it out there, it indirectly becomes a product, because everything on the web is content based. Like it's like Twitter seeks products, Webtoon seeks products, Hiveworks seeks products. Like it's all divided up into things that are essentially making the space where you're pushing this marketed. So like that's sort of this idea that people were complaining about a lot, that, you know, anything you expose on the internet, like all hobbies have to become professional. Like, yes, that is an issue, because every kind of platform that is online and every kind of platform that is in print, because obviously there's an investment if you're printing a book, becomes like, makes stuff framed as a product. So there's this idea of like making people who really want to do stuff for themselves actually do stuff for themselves and not necessarily feel the need to share it. Like, because anything you share has that point of view. And you sort of always have to exercise this idea that like, because it's always public, then it's always product, is sort of like a really hard mindset to start to absorb, because it's really depressing. But
it's
at the same
that
time,
millennial hustle.
Yeah, but at the same time, you know, this is the late stage capitalism mindscape we live in. And I feel like thinking about it this way also kind of helps you like get your heart broken way less, because you're not going like, I don't understand what's wrong with people. I posted my super personal introspective thing about my mother that used to beat me and people are talking about it. Like, yeah.
Because I set up this art gallery show doesn't mean you had to come here.
Yeah, it's a little bit like that. And I mean, it kind of sucks in a way, but like that's why you sort of have to talk to people and this is the job that the editor does, but you also have to train sort of like the editor inside your mind to go like, is this work that should be public or is this work that should be private? And by private, we don't mean post to your personal Twitter. By private, we mean you draw it to like exercise your storytelling and doodling muscles, and then you do nothing with it, or you just print it as like a limited zine that people have to buy physically. Like, you have to control the distribution method a little bit. Because, yeah, you shouldn't put everything out there, because everything out there becomes consumed. It's just how it is. Or maybe you can if you don't care, like, but then you have to have the mindset to not care. Like,
you gotta own it.
But then that's like awareness also, like to post it out there and be like, I don't give a shit, I'm a rebel. Like, you're still aware that it's a product though. Like, you came to this conclusion knowing this.
Yeah. And like we're totally out of time. We're like 15 minutes past it.
I know.
But we're still invested in this. Like, editors inherently know that like the stories that you make have an impact. And there's this whole debate online where it's like, does fiction affect reality? And like,
yeah.
kind of. Yes, kind of. Because otherwise we wouldn't be telling you, when you have like a racist character in your story, we wouldn't be telling you like, hey, that's not okay, because it's gonna be hurtful. It's gonna introduce like very young impressionable readers that this is okay, which is not okay. Like, we wouldn't have this kind of sense of this moral compass about what we should talk about as editors and how we should go about talking about it when we do talk about it, if it didn't in some way affect readership, even if it's just so baseline, just like, are they going to be happy or not?
Yeah, I mean, it's everything is distribution now, so you always have to think about it. Everything is stories, you know. It's a bit silly, but you know, this is the mind we live in, the minefield we live in, and that's why everybody kind of has to develop editorial skills. It's the same sort of basic line as like, if you're learning to be an artist, you should definitely take some management courses like accounting and shit, because that's kind of, you know, stuff you should know. It's kind of the same. You should have some media literacy awareness. And, you know, I'm aware that it takes time to develop this, and not everybody has the environment where they can, like, freaking read every novel ever made. Like, not everybody has a public library that's, like, 10 steps from them. They have to take 5 buses to get there. But that's where the idea of community helps, I think. You have... Yeah, that's... You have editors in your community, you have other artists, and, you know, they're like, your pals.
Yeah.
They're here to help. It's probably the best.
It's a form of...
I thought you're cutting out.
Cutting out a lot? I think that is then cause for us to close off this chat, yeah?
Yeah, well, we went overboard a little bit. Too many good questions. This is definitely the panel we had the most questions for.
I'm glad.
That was really fun. I'm really glad that we helped people understand editors a bit more. We're here to help. Like, and again, not every editor is a good editor. Maybe you'll get a bad one. If you get a bad one, it's okay if you're upset, and it's okay if you want to get rid of them and talk to the manager. It's fine. It's perfectly understandable. Nobody's gonna be mad. Well, maybe that guy's gonna be mad, but whatever. He's a dick. What do you care?
Yeah. Look, editors are your friends, and if someone isn't your friend, if they're being abusive, manipulative, then talk to their manager. Get someone else.
Yeah, they're not a good friend then. Like, it's pretty, it's pretty much there. Definitely read a lot of books. A lot of people say like, oh, you shouldn't read books about the hero's journey or like the 3-act structure, because, you know, all work is based on that. But actually, I say the opposite, that you should totally read books about this, because all work is based on that. So, you know, anybody who's telling you don't read things so they don't influence you, or don't read things because it's too classic, don't listen to those jamokes, because absolutely you need to know the basics. So I recommend that. Read a bunch of books about that kind of stuff. And, you know, if you like a book, like a novel, definitely check out who the publisher and the editor is. It's usually in the copyright page. If you find editors that you like, you'll notice that they probably make a lot of books that you appreciate, and that's a really good way to sort of get to know an editor. Yeah. So thanks a bunch for tuning in, everybody, and thank you, Adela and Brad, for being here. Again, reminder, Brad Brown, author of Blaster Nation and the mature comic Rockcocks. Do not read if you're not 18.
If you are 18, please read.
Yeah, please read. Atla, who is an editor at Hiveworks and co-author of many projects that I don't think they're all announced yet, but definitely follow Atla on Twitter to get some more of that good stuff. Reminder that we've got a sale going on in our store, Spring 2020. Get 10% off, get those sweet, sweet bucks, and check out the Kickstarters that Hiveworks got currently running. Alice in Nightmare Book 1 and Among Us Book 1, both very good books. Long descriptions on the Kickstarter page that you should check out. And we've got another panel in about 40 minutes. That one is Worldbuilding NOPES. So if you want to stay connected to the stream, it's going to start in 40 minutes here. Otherwise, we'll just come back or check it out later, because all this is going to be posted on YouTube. So you can like, share, subscribe, etc. to our YouTube page and show to your friends who might have questions about editors this wacky little presentation. Anything to say, Brad or Atla, sort of close out, say goodbye?
Vote for Bernie.
Yeah. Definitely. Socialism, y'all.
But your work is a self-expression of yourself, and you can never remove yourself from the work that you make. So be careful of what you're saying through your work. Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Starting to record. It should connect pretty soon. Let me just make sure it's connected, and then we will start. Come on, connect. Connect. I am your master.
Yeah, you tell him. Show it who's boss.
Yeah, how dare you disobey me. All right, here we go. We are connected. So, hello everybody. Welcome back. This is the 8th stream and the last one. Woo! In this weekend of streams that we're doing here at Hiveworks under the hashtag #BeHome. So, a little reminder for everybody who is tuning in on Twitch. If you scroll down from the viewing window, we've got a bunch of really cool links you can check out. Mainly, we've got a store sale going on right now. Hashtag code Spring 2020. If you use it, you can get 10% off all our books and apparel and all of the cool stuff in our store. Super worth it. Discover some cool comics. As always, if you're discovering Hiveworks for the first time, we're an online publisher and just general studio, and all our comics are free to read online first, so you can discover a bunch of really fun comics if you don't know any of our comics yet. Check them out at hiveworkscomics.com. And 2 Kickstarters we got running currently for print versions of some of our comics. So we've got Alice in Nightmare Book 1 going, and we've got Among Us. Oh, I forgot to switch the image. This is how you can tell this is my last stream, because I'm a little loopy. There we go. So yes, I was saying, we've got Among Us Book 1 that's also available on Kickstarter. Definitely check out both. Back one if you want to. It's always appreciated. So, the stream we're having right now, Worldbuilding NOPES. With me today to discuss this, we have Taylor Robin, who is the author of Never Satisfied. Very good comic that I enjoy. Well, I enjoy all the comics in this, so I'm just gonna blanket statement, love all of these. Misha Krivanek, who is the author of Alice in the Nightmare, currently on Kickstarter. Diana Hugh, who is the author of Lonely Vincent, that is currently on hiatus, but will be coming back pretty soon, more awesome than ever. And finally, myself, Isabel Meloso, and my partner, Megan Levy-Heaton. We are the authors of Namesake, and I'm also your host, and have been your host for the past couple of panels. Get used to me, because I'm here forever, apparently. So the first thing to sort of bring up before we start getting into the nope section of this is what is world building, because that is kind of like a word that a lot of people throw around without necessarily defining it. But you know, there's a lot of stuff on Twitter that like, oh, if you're writing a book or a comic, you have to world build so much. Like if you don't world build, you suck or whatever. Like putting a lot of pressure on this. World building is at its core just the process of constructing a fictional universe. Like there's no deep science to it. It's just like building a world. And there's a lot of approaches to it. Some people make very detailed world that have a lot of layering. Some people, they go like the Tolkien route and they do everything from defining like what cloth is like to full languages. And there has definitely been a trend lately towards pushing people to world build extremely intensely when they create works, because of the whole internet culture of overanalyzing everything. So world building and like being extremely detailed and being able to answer all the questions perfectly, instead of just being able to go like, I never thought about it, or I just didn't focus on that part of the story, is like being really pushed. So this idea that world building has to be extremely detailed as opposed to just like building the small universe around your character and the history of that world a little bit has been pushed lately. So we're sort of going to talk like in this environment of hyper backgrounding, what are things that people should avoid, and you know, what's it like to write a story that's got more of a focus on the characters instead of the super intense background, or even building a background like on namesake from pre-existing works, and how that sort of like does a shortcut towards world building. Because here with Never Satisfied and Lonely Vincent, the worlds that are being built in those comics are extremely focused on the characters. For both of them, I don't even think we know the name of the country that the characters are in at all. Like, it doesn't matter.
And you never will.
You never will. So, you know, let's talk about that. Let's start by talking about your approach, your individual approach as all the people in this group to world building, and then we can talk about, you know, what not to do. Eternal host, yes, that's me. So who wants to start? Taylor, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll start as the anti-world building guy. I believe in doing basically as little as possible as you can get away with world building. Like, I don't name the city. I don't name more than maybe 2 places in it. I explain as little as possible about how magic works. Like, because it's just chaff to me. It just gets in the way.
However, the characters are very intricate in the works you thing, and the works you do, and some people argue that like world building is just the world and not the characters, and character building is the character work. In your point of view, building the characters is way more important than building the world.
Absolutely, because they're who the story is about. I mean, I will say that I do enjoy stories that have world building. It's just not for me to make it myself because it's a lot more work. But I do enjoy like exploring those spaces.
Do you believe that character building and world building are completely different entities?
No, I think world building ideally is there to build the characters. Yeah.
How about you, Misha? How do you approach world building?
Well, for myself, I am one of those red string, I like to analyze everything. So, for myself, I like creating a list of like all different locations, not necessarily that my characters would ever go to, but if they do go somewhere, then that is for their character development and writing, like for the characters. But just for myself and people who are like me, I like having a little handy dandy guide, almost like a little tourist pamphlet. That's like, oh, there are all these, like, you know, there are some cool locations here. We might not see them because they're not part of the story, and I am not made of time or money, so I can't necessarily go to these places. But, you know, ideally I like fleshing out my worlds for myself.
You kind of use the expression of like a visitor guide. So your type of world building is intense because you have a certain passion for like really layering it, but it's not necessarily technical, like one would picture as sort of a Tolkien-esque world building, but it's more like casual enjoyment kind of thing.
Yeah, pretty much. Like if the if like you for me personally, if I get like too deep into like the history of the world or like what happened in 1892 or whatever, that just gets in the way of a lot of stuff. But just knowing like key dates that involve certain characters and just where the characters are and how they grow in relation to the world, that's something that I think about a lot. And for Alice specifically, in earlier versions, the wonder powers, they had a different name that didn't really relate to the world at all. And eventually I did realize that, like, oh, these are people living in this world and have organically grown with this world. Why wouldn't they take, like, you know, terminology from the world itself, aka the wonder powers coming from the term Wonderland specifically? Like, finding ways that characters and the people in this world mesh together, because it really is all one big thing.
Sort of the opposite between like someone who's writing a book and they name like a location like jumble letters the Long Sands instead of just calling it like the Long Sands like a normal person would on location.
Yeah, pretty much.
How about you, Diana? What's your approach to building the world?
I don't know. I feel like I shouldn't be on this panel because I don't. I'm kind of in the same way. I take a big back seat to it because at the end of the day, I'm more focused the characters' experiences through the world, and for the most part, the characters of my comic aren't they don't really care about what's going on in the world. But I hope to show that as time passes and as they grow into better people, that's how you see the world expand, and that's how you show it. Like, instead of using world building to create kind of like this full fantasy, I'm not quite too concerned about that. I'm more concerned about using the world building to prop up what I'm trying to accomplish with like the characters' points of views and there's like general arcs throughout the story.
You're also
Welcome to the
professionally
Resistance.
the Resistance. You're also professionally a storyboard artist, so would you argue that you've been professionally sort of like inclined to do any kind of character building and world building in a more visual manner that sort of works with a comic medium instead of sitting people down and go like, here's the sitch, you know?
I mean, I think, yeah, like, I mean, I don't know. I kind of feel like I started off in comics first before I ever did storyboards. But, now that I've been in my career for a few years now, like, yeah, I definitely feel like I'm more focused on showing action instead of what I'm used to growing up with, which I love, by the way. I love the Tolkien stuff. I love, like, building being fed to like readers and to audiences in a way that makes you believe in this world that's beyond what the characters themselves see. But I guess in my own like vapid vain point of view, I just prefer to see what they're going through and then go from there.
I think that's pretty interesting. To sort of divert with me and Megan into like the kind of world building that we do in Namesake,
which I love. It's so good.
I feel a lot of the world building in Namesake though uses a lot of shortcuts, which is something that I like to do because a lot of it is based on existing stories and histories, but a lot of the people who are consuming Namesake haven't necessarily done like a deep dive in the literature that we're using. So even when we're retelling it, it still seems really fresh and new to the people who are consuming the content. There's also a lot of visual symbology in Namesake. Like, Megan and me use a lot of, like, eyeballs and crowns and swords as, like, repeated pattern throughout the story. So sometimes I'll do a page where Megan's like, oh, okay, so in this page we probably should mention the King of Crowns. So I put like a skull and a crown in the background and someone's like, hey, like they recognize the symbology as a recurrent like world building item. So even though we're not directly telling people like, okay, this part is about the King of Crowns, someone goes like, hey, look, I saw that. What are you trying to pull?
Well, and I also wouldn't call them shortcuts, though. I feel like what you and Meg are doing with Namesake is kind of just like continuing the tradition of like the epic storytelling and world building that that we all grew up with, and I think it's honestly amazing. Like I think everybody on this chat has like we each have a different approach to world building in our stories, and it's so great to see it. Like I love
I
it.
know, that's why I picked all these people. I want to see us butt heads when we get to the nope section.
So I want to say though, Isa and I are an interesting team because Isa is very much our ideas person. Don't get me wrong. She is the one who came up with our overall symbols like the King of Crowns and stuff like that, the colors and the motifs. That is all her. I'm very much our details person. I love research. When we started Namesake, I got every single biography of Mom, of Charles Dodgson, aka Lewis Carroll, of James Barrie, of all the people involved. I sat and read the books, and so I think that works in Namesake because we have that mesh of the overall ideas person and the really key detail person.
I think
I
this
totally
sort of,
agree.
yeah, I think this sort of like flows into my next point too. And Diana mentioning that Tolkien was like a big favorite of hers too. I feel like there's sort of this loss because a lot of people, when they think like big world building, they think about Tolkien immediately because he's the easiest example to go like this fucking guy that makes up a language. But I feel like the difference between a lot of people trying to imitate Tolkien and Tolkien himself is that Tolkien's world building can be like lifted from the story, and a lot of the stories remain intact. Like Lord of the Rings, you follow Frodo through his quest, and all you need to know is kind of like ring bad, Sauron worse, and you can still sort of follow the story. You don't have to like read the Silmarillion in any shape or form. And
He did it because he just wanted to, really.
Yeah, you did it because it was fun. And I feel like a lot of imitators,
They don't get that part.
they don't get
They
that
feel
part.
like they have to.
You have to, and a lot of the dialogue makes it impossible to not know the story. Like this is like the biggest nope for me. I hate when a comic starts off explaining the history of the world. Like, because first of all, I don't know anybody yet. I'm not gonna care yet. Like, I don't give a shit. I'm sorry.
Where are the future friends? Bring them.
Yeah, bring the friends first. But also, it's like you're throwing all this stuff at me that I have to remember, because like it's basically saying like 4 gods long ago, blah blah blah, and then they farted out a sword or something. Like, you're giving me all of this, and now I have to remember this because in 10 minutes from now, you're gonna have the 2 leads. They're gonna go like, "Hey Jeff, hey Bob. Remember when there was a war 15 years ago with the 5 gods?" And Bob's gonna be like,
names like Jeff and Bob.
then Bob, yeah, Bob's
Well,
like,
I mean-
absolutely.
It's not like in comics, but I love the opening to Avatar: The Last Airbender because it summarizes the story in like 15 seconds. And if you've
That's
never
all
seen
you
it
need.
before- Yeah,
That's
if you've
all
never
you
seen it before,
need.
you know what world you're entering and you know what's happening.
But the difference between someone just info dumping before you meet the characters and the opening of Avatar is that the opening of Avatar is literally all you need. It's essentially the Frodo good, ring bad, basically. Like, that's why it works. And it's not like if you skip the opening,
You'll still get it.
you'll still get it. Like, it's not necessary. It lifts right out of there. It's short and it's direct. The Fire Nation attack. Because that's what's fun about it too, is that I feel like when you have like a this little introduction that introduces the world, because the difference between someone who's like 5 gods long ago farted out a sword and Avatar: The Last Airbender is that Avatar: The Last Airbender, that's just like flavor. It just like Megan says, real fast, it sort of puts you in the story. But the actual story is way more complex, and the Fire Nation is not completely made of the enemy. And a lot of the story in the episodes is about how they're not the enemy, but then, you know, in Zelda, you have to know that the Triforce is from the Free Gods, because in every game you get at some point where they're like, oh yes, remember that one god? Anyway, their Triforce is the wisdom one, and that's the one you have. And it's like, bitch, what? Like, I just wanted to climb some monsters.
One example, though, from Namesake, that it was an early world-building decision by the two of us that I really liked, is how we basically summarized Dia's books through the eyes of Ginger, which basically turned it into a whole girl power insulting Warwick thing.
Yeah, she was just making a speech of like, remember when we kicked ass? Let's kick ass again. Like, it's just fun.
Yeah,
You go, Diana.
Oh, no. Yeah, you know, I was in the same boat. Like, I personally agree too. I'm not a huge fan of like info dumps at the beginning. Like, I really think it just slows down the story. And like you said, like, nobody really cares at the end of the day. We just want to get with like the main characters, like journeys and stuff. But over the years, I've realized that, like, you know, a lot of people, like audiences, they're so forgiving. They'll take anything as long as it's like interesting enough. So like, while I don't like it, I certainly know that it works for a lot of people. So then I'm just like, I don't know what a nope is.
I think it also works depending on the context. Like, this info dump at the beginning works if you're doing like a game.
Because, I think something we definitely need to acknowledge is the difference in mediums. Like, the 15-second intro works for Avatar because it's 15 seconds. That is a measurable thing of time. But in a comic, that would be maybe several pages, or like something that you interact with in a game. I think there's totally a different like criteria.
Like,
I totally agree.
Yeah, in a game they have to do, like, I feel a lot of people who use that info dump, they kind of copy it because they copy it from like other mediums that they like games or whatnot. But you kind of need it in a game because that's not the point of the media you're using. Like, the point is to give you vague context.
Something to whack.
Yeah, so you can get to the smashing. That's what you're here for. So it's flavor in that context, because that's not the execution. But if you're doing a novel or a comic, then it sort of ruins the execution, because like I think it's Diana that said that it puts a stopper at the beginning. But in a game,
I'm actually a lot more forgiving of lore and info dumps in novels than I am in comics. I feel like you can totally get away with it more in a novel.
Why so?
I totally agree with that. Yeah.
I think it's because, for one, you get through it a lot quicker than in a comic. Because in a comic, for one, you have so many pages that you also have to draw. But as a reader, you expect comics to move quicker. But in novels, you kind of don't.
Yeah, I think I agree with that, just because since like a novel is asking for more engagement from a reader than a comic would, because comics will provide like a visual medium for you to like, and that's another way.
Yeah, the visual aspect is also very important. With novels, you don't have that. You kind of have to spoon feed the information. You can't just show.
Yeah, basically.
What do you guys think of someone like doing it but fully just through like vague descriptions, like not even through the character point of view at all?
Do you mean like we're still talking novels, do you mean like third person, like that kind of thing?
No, not even like, you know how we're using the Avatar example. The Avatar one is fully through Aang's point of view. It talks about Aang. It's the voice is his past incarnation, the one right before him, who is his mentor. Like, it's really angled in Aang, but then you have other books where it's like third person and it's not even touching the characters at all. It's a preamble.
In Avatar? I thought it was Katara that does the intro in Avatar. Are we talking about something else?
Wait, is it Katara?
Yeah.
It is Katara. Oh, yeah, sorry. So it's definitely even more related to Aang, because, you know, his girlfriend's doing the it's doing the intro.
Yeah, we're not getting like a actual history of how the Fire Nation swept through the Earth Kingdom or whatever. We're just getting, they did this, Bye.
They did this, let's go.
Time to quest.
He's gone. Now he's back.
I guess what thing when you read books, what aspect of a world do you personally not like? Like if someone puts this in their world, you're like, why? Why would you do
Well,
this?
I don't notice this in novels, but I do notice this in comics in particular that I will say is my personal nope. And again, like anything I say is like totally personal. I don't think this is like I don't
This
think
is a
there's
safe
rules
space.
for storytelling at all. Yeah, it's a safe space. But basically, I don't like it when there is key information being delivered by like dialogue that isn't driven by the main character. So like let's say it's like a character walking through like a busy area and then you see in like the background people whispering about like a murder happening or something. Like I think that is a little for some reason it doesn't really die well for me because especially if like the main character is not privy to it or is not paying attention, but we're supposed to pay attention to it. I'm just like, okay, then like let the character let the character remark on the fact that there's a murder happening. Why don't they care? Why do we need to know? And like I don't know, I noticed that like sort of thing happening in comics a lot that kind of drives me up the wall.
Like
I
it's a
think I
bit
can agree
passive.
with that.
Yeah, it's a bit passive. It's like, oh, I just happened to walk by this really important. It's kind of like when characters turn on the radio and the first thing that plays is like a murder
Yeah.
escaped in your area.
Yes, exactly.
Like lucky tune in, you know. Good job, me. What about you, Misha? What's your biggest like every time you see this in a book, you're just like, ugh, no.
Ooh, I think my biggest note has to do with scale. Um, Mostly because uh, there was a book I was reading that was like fantasy. It was years ago now, but I just remember feeling it was like they had their own like terminology for like seconds that was like this many worms passed, and I'm like, really, you couldn't just use the word seconds? But that's another thing. But I never got a good sense of
Worm.
like the scale of the place or like how far the characters had to travel, because it was just like so fast travel instantaneous that it just really rubbed me the wrong way. And especially if you have like a big old fantasy world and like a big city, and like it takes time to get to these places, and you're not like, if you can't just like magically transport, and it's like, oh, is the big temple like right next door to the palace? What are you talking about?
Yeah, I
And
do I do really hate when they change time things. I gotta say, like, I know if you have fantasy world, you don't like you're assuming that people are not going to use like November, December, January, but you could just say 2 weeks later. You don't have to be like, oh yes, we are in the cycle of the Zorgit after their Zorgit, and you're like, huh?
Mercury's in retrograde.
Yeah, or at least use something that we can sort of like like that we can sort of correlate to, like 5 moons ago. You're like, all right, so a month, like something that you can translate. Where they just make it up entirely, and there's like a glossary at the end, and you're just like,
Glossaries.
I'm not gonna flip through to read this. I'm just not. I'm gonna assume that a very long amount of time has passed, or not at all, and
yeah,
not care.
the only time a glossary has like uh well, a couple of times glossaries have really worked for me was in uh the Six of Crows duology, where like at the end they had a glossary of like all the different characters and like their relations and names, because there are a lot of characters in those books.
I
So
think
that was
that's
helpful.
fair.
That's just a character
And
guide, though. It's not
Yeah.
really.
yeah,
Yeah,
but
that's good.
in on London, which is a British book, at the end for English copies, there's like British slang and like different sorts of terminology that might not read to American readers. And that book has some of my favorite world building in it, and just like the scale, the inventiveness of like, this is a city made of the trash that kind of like melts through our world and grows organically in theirs. Like, I love that so much.
But yeah, you gotta make it relatable. I also hate that. It's because it's like you're trying to be clever, but nobody knows what the hell you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least be clever for real. Like, it's when they do it and they make up words. You're like, I have no idea. At least, like, make it, I don't know, metric. Like, it's always 10, 10, 10. That's a thing, too. Like, if you want to make time interesting and you want to change it and you want to make it relatable, then use, like, math that is understandable, like sets of 12 or 10. It's when you have books that are like, oh yeah, sets of 5. It's like, why? Why would you do this? Now we all
Clearly, they all just have 5 fingers.
Yeah, now we all have to become experts at counting.
How dare you put calculus in this book?
Ugh.
I think the only time I've run into where that kind of fantasy timekeeping and stuff worked was Discworld, because it was a joke and because it didn't really matter.
Well, the point of it was that books do this, so it's funny because...
Yeah, but sometimes they do it completely in earnest and it just doesn't work.
Yep. What about you, Corny? What's the thing that you see in every book and you're like, ugh?
Honestly, I don't read too many books, but the thing that bothers me in world building in general is often the way that information is conveyed, like the as you know problem, where characters will deliver information to people that already know that information, but it's for the sake of the reader. It just pulls me right out.
Yeah, I think that's why it's probably better to sort of keep to, like, having some kind of audience surrogate in a group. Because otherwise you get... Like, I actually liked how they did it on The Witcher. Because you had 2 episodes where it was just The Witcher, so nothing was explained. And at some point they introduced the Bard, and then stuff was being explained.
The Bard.
Oi, Witcher. Sorry, I had to do that.
Sorry?
Sorry. I always just say oi Witcher whenever I hear Witcher.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, at some point you need, like, a character that serves as the audience thing, because, like, and I really liked how they did it for that, because the first 2 episodes, your time is weird, because...
Time is weird in the whole thing, really.
Yeah, because they have...
So confusing.
They have free converging storylines, but at some point you catch on, but you only start catching on when they introduce the audience surrogate character, which is the Bard, whose name I forget now. Jaskier?
Jaskier?
Yeah, Jaskier.
Yeah.
And
to be honest, I really loved how they did it. I loved it.
I mean, I loved it too.
Yeah, Witcher was great.
I really liked it. Like, this is not a complaint, but I like how they started and they were like, you're confused at first because the storylines are not clear and you don't have an audience surrogate, and then they introduce Jaxier and it becomes clearer and you're like, oh, I get it. Yeah, that's good. I'm into this now. Plus he's got a dope song. You know, you gotta respect the man.
Yeah, he's just cute.
He's a very good boy. Good lad.
See, I tried watching Witcher, and I couldn't even get through the first episode because I was like, what happens? What's going on? But hearing you guys talk about this now, I might give it another shot.
Definitely get to, basically get to episode 3 with Jaxier, because that's when, again, the audience surrogate is there. If as soon as you get to the audience surrogate part, you still can't get into it, then maybe it's not for you. But I basically noticed everybody said, I couldn't get into it because the first 2 episodes were confusing. It's because they tried to do it where it's just, organic world building where they explain nothing. And then it's after that Jaxier is like, what about this? What about that? And, Geralt has to explain shit even though he doesn't want to.
You know,
Right,
just
yeah.
talking about this, has also brought up, you bring up an interesting thing, because, the reason, speaking of Witcher, the reason why I loved it so much is I felt like it continued in the tradition of the shows that I grew up with, like Xena and Hercules. And
Oh
I
my
kind
God,
of
it is
wonder
that.
if, yeah, right?
I just realized that's exactly what it is.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Hell yeah. When I started watching it, I was like, Xena. I'm connected.
So, and that's kind of the interesting thing when it comes to, readers and their relationship with, genre, and also just, world building and, what they are familiar with. Because, because I went into, The Witcher being yeah, this is exactly like Xena, I totally understood what I was trying to do. I was down for it the whole time. Whereas like I would totally understand why other people that wouldn't have that familiar background would just be completely turned off by it. And I can see this with so many other ways of like world building, like how people may respond badly to a Tolkien-esque like world building point of view, but they probably would respond well to more character based like world building thing. I don't know, it's just interesting.
I feel like stuff like Xena and Hercules kind of works a bit on the same kind of world building as we use for Namesake, where it's very referential. Like Xena definitely has like, because it's like a Monster of the Week story, there's a easy storyline you can follow, but every time there's a new character, it's like a god or like an actual Greek character that they changed a lot. Obviously, it's not like always directly the god. And sometimes they change in the show itself. Like my favorite thing is like Hades and Xena started off scary, and then the Disney Hades came out and he became like a used car salesman style character. Like he was highly influenced by James Woods immediately.
Yes.
But I feel like it's that whole like building a story that's got like a referential base that if you know it, you're like, oh yeah, it's this character from this myth. And you can be like, ooh, that doesn't end well. This episode is probably not going to go super good. But if you don't know that, you can still follow. Like, it's interesting. It's sort of the same thing with Witcher because it's got a lot of referential stuff to, like, sort of mythology and this idea of, like, he's a monster killer. So there's a lot of, like, compounded, like, history from past works that sort of influences the way you view it. And the Witcher books themselves, I don't know if you've read them, but they're actually all fairy tales based stuff. Like that girl on the first Witcher episode, I can't remember her name.
Yennefer?
Sorry?
Oh, that's her name.
Which girl? There's several women.
The one that he bangs and then he kills.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah. Because in the book she's like a Beauty and the Beast character.
Oh, right, her.
Yeah. So it's really they removed that completely from the TV show. And from the games also. Like I think they just removed that completely. But the original books have a lot of like fairy tale nods. So the original books themselves have that whole referential world building. Which is interesting if you're into that.
No, right. And it's interesting just to think that like we're all basically, that's what we're all doing. Like we feel like we're all just inventing something new, but in actuality we're like continuing this long tradition of storytelling and we're just choosing, I guess, our own faction in some way. Like Taylor, I know for Never Satisfied, like your comic is gorgeous and like you just kind of start off each chapter with like, oh yes, of course. You start off each chapter with just like that beautiful spread and then like the square around it and you just highlight like a particular moment in time and like I really feel like that sets the tone for world building as well, in particular with comics.
Thanks.
I was wondering, Megan, do you want to also chime in with like the thing that you hate the most in world building when you see it?
Lack of consistency. Don't change your mind. Just arbitrarily change your mind. I hate reading in stories where they introduce one concept and then all of a sudden, same concept has just randomly changed for no reason. And the other thing is when they kind of half-ass changing stuff. Like if you want to come up with an otherworldly name for like a sofa, just go all the way. Don't say sofa carpal tunnel. Just call it carpal tunnel. We're gonna know it's a sofa. It's you don't want to over-explain things, and you definitely want to maintain consistency.
You basically don't like people who don't commit.
Yes.
Like commit, damn it! I'm into this. Make me like either I'm committed to reading this, so you should be committed to writing this kind of deal.
Yes, it's kind of like. Get an editor, get somebody to read behind you, get somebody to check your details. I know it's hard working alone, especially when you are handling art and writing and every single thing about your comic, but keep a notebook or something for the concepts you've invented and for the magic you've invented and currency and things like that, and do your absolute best to remain consistent. Just don't be one day like, oh, I'm tired of this, I'm just going to randomly call it purple now, when up to 33 chapters up to that point it's been green.
I'm so guilty of this. But this is also partially why I don't go in very hard on world building, because you can get away with it if you don't commit. Basically, my philosophy is that if it hasn't happened in the story, it's fine to change it. Like, I could not tell you guys how many times Lucy's backstory has changed since I started the comic.
But then you're still consistent because you haven't shown it yet.
I know, but in the back is where I'm bad. I'm terrible.
And that's fine. Like, in Namesake, we have changed the backstories of pretty much everybody since the start of the comic.
Yeah,
but it's
we
never
did that.
Once you have committed to the page, you do need to adhere to that. Like, when we were doing printing, we were reprinting book 1, we had to actually go back and fix some of Jack's very early scenes so they were consistent with the backstory we revealed in book 4.
Oh wait, I totally didn't realize that there was a discrepancy in Jack's storyline that way. Because I've been reading Namesake for a long time, so for me, like, the reveal that he had like this really traumatic past where he lost his beautiful giant wife, like, now I want to go back and read the pages and see what you guys changed.
Well, to be fair, his background that he lost his wife was always kind of there, but the wife changed. At first, it was a different character. In the first version of Namesake, his wife was actually Wendy, and then Wendy just became a character.
One thing that did make it to the page, though, at first, is the implication where Bird implies that Jack and Alice slept together. Well, we now know of Alice that would have never happened, and so we had to go fix that.
Yeah, just erase past sins. I even think, honestly, I'm not even sure that we intended that originally. I think it was actually even a typo, to be honest.
No, we intended it originally. I remember.
Alright, I don't, it didn't feel very solid to me, so I'm like, sometimes I'm like, wait, was that actually just a mistake?
On shot first, okay? Awesome, I killed the whole cat. Have a good afternoon, everybody.
I think another point that could be interesting to tell, I think, with world building, and that comes up a lot, which shows are very popular, like the infamous Game of Thrones, but sort of like world building that builds on gender roles a lot. Like, yeah, I agree, but we have to elaborate on why. But sort of like
I'm not a fan.
Yeah, nobody is, but we kind of have to explain why it's bad. Sort of this idea of like, for works like, I think it sort of works a little bit for works like Game of Thrones because it is based on, he's basically just copying the War of Roses, but he's also adding some stuff that could be removed. So let's talk about
dragons.
Like dragons. So let's talk about that, like gendered roles in world building and people going like, oh, if you change those, it's unrealistic. Like
I think we could expand it to general like societal prejudices.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So anything that's like prejudice and intolerance and social positions and classism, people saying that if you don't include that in your world building, you're basically being unrealistic because that's what the real world is like. Like thoughts on that and what elements of it are relevant in certain types of storyline and stuff like that.
My thoughts are they're wrong. I generally prefer, if you're gonna tell a story in a fantasy world involving these things, the story has to either be about these things or very tightly like involved with those things. Otherwise you are just repeating problems that you don't need to.
Yeah,
it's a fantasy.
Yeah, like, not to bring back The Witcher again, but a lot of people were complaining about how in The Witcher they had a lot of actors of color all over the place, which I thought was great. But a lot of people complained that it was like, oh, it's not realistic. But a lot of the prejudice in The Witcher itself was directed towards magic. Like, people accepted normal and then magic was bad, so they didn't like the Witcher and they didn't like elves and stuff like that. So I thought that was an interesting way to sort of be like change how it's angled. I thought that was fun.
Yeah, I liked that in The Witcher too.
Like it still talks
and
about...
I like world building where there are prejudices based on like abilities people have, but I think you have to really commit to that kind of thing. Like I think I've talked about before, probably on Twitter, how if you're going to do a story where people are oppressed or prejudiced against based on something, like based on them being actually dangerous, you have to really commit to unpacking that in the story, because otherwise you're just justifying illogical figures in real life. You know what I mean?
Sort of like when people use robots as a metaphor, like when people are like, oh, using robots as a metaphor for like dehumanizing.
I mean, like comparing X-Men mutants being discriminated against, like they can shoot fire out of their hands. That's a reasonable discrimination. And comparing that to real world discrimination, I think is kind of disingenuous.
Yeah.
So you have to really like commit to pulling the guts out of that concept.
What about?
I think it's always a tricky subject. Whenever I do see racism allegories in fantasy, it always makes me a little, because especially most of the time it is from white creators that are trying to, like, especially some, and I've seen this a lot, and as a fan of fantasy and like world building, it's always disappointing to see when you see like this fair-skinned race that is suddenly a part of, you see them go through discrimination, and then they cut to like a panel of like people of various like backgrounds and skin colors, and I'm just like, okay. I'm like, it's not that it's bad, I don't know, it just makes me side-eye a bit.
It's definitely awkward,
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I'm unfortunately at the point in my life as a consumer and reader that I can't help but look at the creator's background and then see what they're trying to do in their work and just be like, okay, why are they doing this? Like, why? I don't know. And it feels bad because I don't want, I do want art to like exist on its own. I want it to stand on its own merits, but I don't know. It's a little complicated.
I mean, no art exists in a vacuum, so I don't think we really can look at anything as standing on its own.
Yeah, totally agreed. It's just weird.
It's definitely super awkward. I think a lot about... So, you guys know the movie, like, Valeriant and the Thousand Planets?
No, I mean, I heard of it, but I never saw it.
Yeah, well,
same.
I don't know anybody that saw it.
Don't see it, it's bad. Sorry?
Yeah, same. I just disagree.
Yeah, it's just a shitty movie. But the first 10 minutes are good. Watch the first 10 minutes, essentially, because it's like a fully separate story. It's essentially Up. The first 10 minutes are like completely different. Essentially, that movie was based on a French comic that I love, which is also called Valeriant. And it's based on one specific issue of the comic where they have this giant structure, which is like the station, which is like in the movie, it's all like different aliens that decided to sort of hang out together and form this like multi-alien culture, multi-dimensional station. And in the book, what happens is that they have the people who started the cell in the book, the first station cell, are actually this really, really old race of aliens. And they sort of get wind that humans are trying to exact a plan where they're going to take over the station and sort of become like, they want to essentially like enslave a bunch of the alien races. The humans are the bad guys in this. And part of the story is about them kidnapping the human ambassador and Valeriant to bring them to the old alien cell and teach them like why this is a bad idea. So essentially, like, Grandpa Alien goes get young idiots to teach young idiots to not be an idiot. And the whole story is about the other character, the female lead, Laureline, trying to find them and bring them back. And then she meets the aliens and she's like, yeah, you should totally listen to these guys, you assholes. So that's the plot of the comic. The plot of the movie is completely different and actually does that thing that Diana mentioned where it's like the frail, pale alien race being, you know, discriminated and exploited, and, you know, racism bad because of this. And I just thought it was really strange to see something use all the world building from the comic where it worked because the idea was that, you know, the humans were gonna exercise colonism and be bad, and the fact that it was happening in that kind of setting was the point. And then the movie, by making the humans like, oh no, humans, they're good actually, they want to help the aliens, like, by changing that message completely, just renders the setting and all the world building that Eoffer did for the comic like senseless. It was really strange to see, because they really worked hard to make the station and the aliens exactly the same as the comic, so all that just falls really flat. So when I think about something that's like really intensely well done and that has world building, that has like racial allegory that's really well done, you really have to do it in that context of something that's really interesting and that it works like that. Because as soon as you change the message in that world, then the world sort of becomes stupid.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, it would have, like Taylor said, it would have to be a focus, and it's hard to commit to that. And, you know, at the end of the day, when I kind of think about my favorite stories that have really good world building, I don't remember it for those minute details. I remember it for the moments of like highs and lows that the characters experience. So I think that's why at the end of the day I do gravitate towards like storytelling or world building that is character focused, because that's all I remember from all my favorite stories.
The world building becomes like a beautiful woven coat that the character gets to wear, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is what we end up remembering anyway. If like all the fan fiction I read is, you know, the common thread in all of it is that we love characters. We love how they interact in the world and how they survive in the world with all the different struggles and issues they go through. We don't remember it exactly for like, in year 622, this and this happened and blah, 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 blah. Like, we don't do that. We remember the character.
Yeah, nobody remembers the background in Judge Dredd. They just remember Judge Dredd.
Exactly.
It's so elaborate for no reason.
Yeah, my favorite example of that is the Polygon Unraveled, where Brian he reads every book in Skyrim and goes through the history ones and just reads out this like really dry history excerpt, and he's just like, it's boring, get out of here.
Did you see the one where he did it on Sonic too? That was really funny.
Yeah, Sonic is actually what I thought you were going to bring up.
The Sonic lore one is amazing.
The knitting circle!
Let Sonic knit! Let Sonic knit! One of us.
Things to include in the sequel. He knits now.
You know what? You bring up a good point. This shows that no one cares about world building because nobody knew that Sonic was from Nebraska. No one.
Nebraska.
Nobody knows when anyone's from Nebraska.
Home of Sonic.
Put that on their billboards.
I mean, you know, it might actually help Nebraskan tourism.
There we go.
What do they have there?
I don't know. I have no idea.
Is there a mountain in Nebraska? Where is Nebraska?
Furiously Googling.
What's in Nebraska?
Smack in the middle.
Oh my god. That is a terrible place to be. Unless the water is rising, which apparently is extremely likely.
Yeah, like the more that we talk about it, the more I realize the best world building is the world building that isn't just like overt in a way. Like
Mm.
if it feels like full enough for you to be fully invested in the characters, then you did a good job. But if it's not full enough, or like if the characters aren't interesting enough, I don't know like what's more important at the end of the day. I guess it just depends.
I think it
I think the
really,
characters.
yeah, the characters. Like, there's so many
Because,
books.
like, I'm not reading about a mountain.
Yeah.
Unless I am,
Yes.
I guess.
But that's like, that's
Unless the characters not.
that's very now though. Like, there was a thing with European comics and like also older fantasy when you think about it, where like the characters kind of were like just audience avatars. They didn't really have that much personality. And a lot of European comics, back when I was a teenager and younger, like Spirou, Asterix, all that, like Asterix obviously has a personality. Like, that, I'm not saying that he's a blank slate, but the adventures of that world are often like, you have 46 pages for shit to happen. Now go. So there's not a lot of introspection, you know? And I feel like more and more media has sort of walked towards the world building being extremely character focused. And in ways are really cute. Like, I really like that from Misha's comic here. And I'll get to Corny's comic too, because I have a comment on that one too. Sorry, Taylor. Taylor.
Either's fine.
Yeah.
I'm a man of many names.
How dare you? So in Misha's comic, there's a bit of a Hogwarts thing going on where the characters in the school they go to are sort of divided by this suit symbol, because it's Wonderland, so people have like card suits. And I think that's really cute, because if you're like a young reader, you sort of have that whole like, ooh, tag yourself, I'm a spade or something.
Oh, yes, that's something we should totally sidebar to talk about, is the kind of world building specifically made for you to insert yourself into.
Yes,
That's my
like-
favorite.
Like Avatar, like
like your
Harry
comic
Potter.
with the familiars, just like the,
Like mine!
yeah, familiars, and just everybody
Like Homestuck.
working. Homestuck, yes, just like this world building that can be extremely complex, but boils down to like this, like, I'm a Hufflepuff, you know, like there's a whole history behind it, and I'm not gonna say it doesn't matter, because people who read the books know that it does, because at some point Harry has to have a huge history lesson so he can find a goddamn crown.
A diadem.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I never even read that book. I just know that for some reason.
Movies?
Nope.
Oh.
Never got that far.
Wait, was it a diadem in the movies, or did they change that? God,
I
who
don't
knows?
know.
I haven't watched the movies at all.
No, I stopped.
I think I got to 5, and then I was like, welp. But
What were you
yeah,
saying?
world building that is basically, especially oriented towards young readers, that is made to help them feel integrated.
Yeah, like categorization.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That was those were genres I always loved, like growing up, because a lot of my like art growth as a youngin, and still to this day, is like self-insert stuff. So
Yes.
I love worlds where you can just like immediately see like, oh, I would be this person, I would live this kind of life, this rules, let's go.
Misha, I'm shaking your hand.
I totally agree.
Same hat.
Same hat.
But even like without it necessarily being a classification, I think there's a lot of that, especially in young works. Like, I'm thinking about Shira and all the princesses, because it'd be so easy to make like a princess OC, you know? Like, if I was 8 and watching Shira, I could be like, I'm the princess of fire. Like, I would absolutely do that. That's 8-year-old me.
Hell yeah.
That's the good stuff.
It's super nice. Yeah, Princess Sona, someone in the chat just for that. Or like witch Sonas, or all that stuff that people do on Twitter. It's just this fun little piece of world building that just, it's like a door. It invites you in. and invites you to be part of it. I think when
Exactly.
yeah, people are commenting in the chat like My Little Pony, Sailor Moon, yeah, all that stuff. Yeah, Sailor Moon, they didn't have that in the anime. Well, they did towards the end, but in Sailor Moon, like all planets had sailors, so you can make Sailor Moon OCs. And on the internet, back in
1,000 Sailor Earths.
oh god,
Everybody had one.
so many. And like in the dark ages of the internet, everybody had a goddamn Sailor Moon OC. Like I had one, everybody did. It's insane. That's the good stuff. Spider Sonas, yeah, that was really recent after
Spider Sonas.
I love doing Spider Sonas.
It was right after Into the Spider-Verse, which is a great movie. That also is constructed on almost entirely referential world building, which I love. I could do like a whole class on Spider-Verse, like please.
Yeah. When I was first watching the movie and he said the line at the end of like, "You can wear the mask," I was like, "Oh, self-insert. I'm here."
It's time. Or like mermaid stories, Dungeons and Dragons. Like there's so much world that, especially in stories oriented to young people, or like young at heart, I suppose. That's me. There's this idea of like being able to create a character and integrate yourself to the world. Or in the cases of like stories told in the modern setting, like in a school, just this idea of like you could be these characters. I find, I don't know, there's something about it that's just so utterly charming, and that really is sort of knitted in this idea of creating like character world building. I know, I just love it.
Yeah, I think that also ties really well into what we were talking about earlier with like being able to connect with the characters on an emotional level before dropping the big ass backstory, where it's like if you have an emotional connection with the world and with these characters and you like them or you're invested in them, then the world just becomes like something that you want to be a part of and something you want to like see more of, because you're viewing it through the eyes of someone that you like and you want to see more of, and you want to see them grow along with this world.
I guess the biggest nope of something like this is, and I've seen this, when you see like a work, especially oriented towards like children, that does it, but in this very cynical way. Like, they're not really trying to have fun, they're just doing it because it sells kind of deal.
Oh, that's the worst.
And like you can always kind of tell when it's not sincere. Like there's a weird plasticity to it, like a weird faux amusement.
Can you give an example?
Oh, I had one a couple days ago, but now I can't think about it at all. Yep, it's gone.
We'll never know.
Well, I'm gonna remember later, and then I'm gonna like tweet about it or something. But
so it's like stuff where they put these categories and type stuff in there just to cash in.
Yeah, someone gave a good example. Someone in the chat is like, you can say Divergent if you want.
Unfortunately, I don't know enough about Divergent.
I mean, it's kind of true.
I unfortunately know too much about Divergent.
It's like it's the same stuff of like the factions and whatnot, and like girl from service faction becomes warrior faction.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's the worst thing.
It was so bad that like they didn't even make the second part of the finale. It just flopped that bad.
Yeah. Divergent is basically, like if you turn classism into Disneyland.
Wasn't that also in the Hunger Games, which I also did not read or watch?
Yeah, but the difference is the Hunger Games point is that it's actually shitty to do that.
Yeah, the Hunger
Games. Divergent say it was good?
Divergent says nothing. It says it has no opinions.
Just as bad.
The Hunger Games, like the books, were actually good and dived more into like the classism and like PTSD and war and stuff. And the movies, they just really gloss over all that.
Yeah. I have heard that.
The point of the Hunger Games books is like, what I think is the best about it is that the ending is kind of bad. I'm not going to spoil anybody, but like the ending is essentially the ending you would expect for someone who survived so much, It's not it's not like we're all good now, whereas Divergent is like, yay, I reverse society and I get to bang this guy. You're like, cool.
She dies in the end of Divergent, though. Oh, spoilers.
Isa, I'm not gonna spoil Misha. I am.
Yeah, I mean, before that, Misha, but sure. Spoilers for Divergent, everybody. but
Well,
before,
Like
Divergent
years old by
also-
now.
yeah, but before she dies in like this epic sacrifice, there is that whole like, I have been sublimated kind of mood that I'm like, what the fuck, book? Don't like this.
The problem with Divergent was the fact that it divided society on not even personality traits, but just like different. I can't even say because it was just like the people that were selfless, warrior, and then I guess hippies, and then government narc. And it was just
Just like Harry Potter.
It was
But
basically split
it's
on
not
like,
really like Potter, because like I don't know, there's something about it that makes it just completely fails on so many different regards. Because like at least Hunger Games, it's about class, right? It's about how capitalism bad and like not.
Yeah, and like it's something that you're born into, and that you have, and like that you have to actively fight to break out of. In Divergent, it's
yeah.
like you're 16, pick a thing.
Yeah, in Hunger
Yeah,
Games, you're born in
exactly.
a district, and, like, sucks to be you if it's, like, one of the lower ones. But in Divergent, you have to pick. And, like, Divergent bugged me because it felt like it was, like, congratulations, you're 16 now, so we're gonna decide where to put you based on, like, the job listing. Because the way they describe the jobs kind of sounds like, you know, when you apply to a job and they describe the job in a way that's, like, too weird. Like, they're like, we're looking for super motivated, influential people to, like,
That's
fuck,
exactly it.
yeah, fuck you. Like, no, don't do that. Like, it's terrible. It's just,
I also thought it was so funny that like, oh my god, and now there's the faction list, and then you see that they're just like basically homeless
just-
people, I guess, and you're just like, wait, what are you trying to say? What is this world? What are you trying to say with this whole thing aside from that you lifted the entire story from Hunger Games? Like, it was so bizarre.
yeah, it's
It blows
so.
my mind that it exists.
I was actually watching it, and you know what movie it reminded me of so much? Ghostbusters. You know how Ghostbusters is all about profit and like Reaganism and all that, and I was watching Divergent, and then I read the book, and I was like, this is fucking Reaganism. What the hell? Why is this here? This is like a teen book. It's so bizarre. Or like another one that's really shitty is like Uglies.
I never heard of that.
I've heard of it, but I'd never read it.
It's god, it's essentially people live in a society where like image is everything. So when you become 16, you can start buying your image. It's essentially it's a similar storyline to the very good webcomic Always Human by Ari North, where in Always Human, it's on Webtoons if anybody wants to read that. That people can like essentially modify their image digitally. And the story around Always Human is that a person cannot purchase image stuff because all these additional digital like extensions to her body, she doesn't have a body who can take it. So the story is about this person who's extremely ordinary because they have like a physical inability to integrate this, falling in love with someone who is addicted to these changes. So it's like an interesting storyline for that. But then
That sounds great. I want to read it.
yeah, it's good. It's really good. It's like a cute romance. So it's like a really interesting social message, but wrapped up in adorableness. So it's great. But then you have Uglies, that's like the same idea, where you have a society where everybody can change their image. So they immediately starify it, and like the hero is all like, I'm gonna be really beautiful, but also I'm gonna be like not like other girls. And it's just like, oh, come, like just 5, what? No, stop. Like, there's 6 books of this. There's so fucking many, and I've read all of them because I am trash. Please do not judge me. And you know, I finished it, and I was like, well, like it had no impact on me except that it made me feel bad about everything always. And it's like, it's such a weird book because it's all about image, but also spends so much time trying to set up that like, ooh, but the characters are like really nice. Like she's good, like she falls for this, but also she's still super good and super smart, we promise. It's like, book, don't tell me, show me. Like, it's a bizarre, but yeah, when I think about stuff like Divergent, I immediately think about Uglies too. So those are some pretty good bad examples. Good bad examples.
My favorite, like, good bad YA example, like just going into the YA book section and reading the back blurbs, is one where it's like, when you turn 16, you get matched with your soulmate. And now this girl, she broke the system because she has two soulmates that are both
Oh, I hate that.
and have short hair, but one is blonde and one is brunette.
I remember
read
when
it.
they I remember when they actually like played with that in The Good Place. Like they had an episode where they were like, Chidi, you have two soulmates now, and Chidi chooses immediately, and then they fuck with him for like an entire episode.
So funny. Oh, so good.
Good Place is the best like
World
Kant.
building.
Yeah, it's the
Just
best
the best,
Kant fan fiction
period.
I've ever read. It's amazing. Watch The Good Place. So good. I think we're basically a bit over time, but we started a bit late, so we can sort of finish. But someone is actually mentioning Margaret Atwood in the chat, and I actually think that's like maybe an interesting topic to sort of like dissect as like a last little world building thing, because I don't know if anybody here is familiar with The Handmaid's Tale, but it was like a very short book at first, and then it became like a sprawling TV series that has huge amount of world building. And the book is fully focused on the character, her limited information, and her just trying to hold on to her personhood. So a lot of the book writing is about like her feelings and her doing things to essentially feel her body and take place in her body, like the sunlight on her arm or the food in her mouth or stuff like that, which makes her a very slow-paced book. But then the TV series is all about like rah revolution, so it's like a really interesting sort of divergent storytelling, which I guess sort of dives into like adaptation and how they adapt the world. Do you guys feel that when you adapt the world and you try to sort of like focus the adapted story on the world more than the characters, do you think that's like a loss or a good thing?
I think it's way too case by case to really give a hard answer one way or another, because you can do it really well, you can do it really bad. And I don't know anything about The Handmaid's Tale to comment on that one specifically.
Yeah, I'm not super familiar with The Handmaid's Tale, but I know for adapting a book like fairy tales or Alice specifically, like there is a lot of focus on well, there's not a whole lot of focus on the world as a whole. It's pretty much just like she fell down a rabbit hole and now there's a forest, maybe a garden, whatever.
Now it's crazy.
Yeah, but just like but trying to take the spirit of it, where it's just like there's all these weird things and it's magic. Don't explain anything. Let's go. But doing like the bare minimum of explaining the suits and like the people's place in this world, but then the rest is just like it's magic. Yay. Like being able to do or being able to do as much as it affects the character, that's I don't want to say it's a good rule of thumb, or there's not really any strict rules in world building because it's such a case by case thing, and especially in adaptations. But again, it does all go back to like characters and emotional pinpoints.
Yeah, and I think like I don't know anything about The Handmaid's Tale, but thinking about adaptations, I think like the best one I've seen recently was The Invisible Man. Like basic
I want
reboot.
to see that so bad. And
So
surprisingly,
the horror movie one?
yeah.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, it's the same actress as The Handmaid's Tale. She's really nailing that typecasting of girl who is terrified and then terrifying.
Yes. So yeah, good for her. But what I love about that in particular is that yes, for me I think the best adaptation is transformation of the original content, but still kind of keeping true to its roots. It's not necessarily having to do with like keeping the same story points, right? Like that's not important. What's more important is keeping the feel and keeping and but still making it interesting. And just FYI, if anyone hasn't watched it yet, please watch The Invisible Man. It's great. It's just like a great case study of gaslighting, just completely heightened, and I recommend it.
Give it your money.
See, I was kind of instantly uninterested in it because the trailer basically was the movie, from what I could tell.
It did not. I promise you, the trailer shows nothing of like what actually happened. It takes so many crazy turns that is really interesting, and there, like I'm at the point where I can kind of tell like what happens in a film just straight from the get go, but there's something that happens in the middle of the film where it just completely caught me off guard, and I was just like, they did a great job. They really did.
Maybe when it comes out.
That's my favorite in going to movies, like as, you know, writers and like people that really do like write and analyze stories, is going into movies and being like, oh, this is gonna happen, this is gonna happen. Like for that new Scooby-Doo trailer that's going everywhere, where he gives him the collar and it's like, I'll never take it off. I just turn to my friend and go, he's gonna take it off.
Bitch is gonna go free. Immediately without a beat. That's happening. Yeah, that's the bad part of writing, is that if something is like kind of basic or not good, you see it coming really fast. That's why I really liked or sometimes you just watch a movie where you can see it coming, but it's good. Like I watched Parasite and I could guess most of what was gonna happen in the movie, but still I was like, man, oh man, what the hell? Like, it's the
Parasite was so good.
I actually had to like get up and walk around because it was so goddamn tense.
Yeah, like you can tell that they're gonna get caught, and you can tell that what's his face at some point is gonna go like a little axe crazy, but you don't care because the performance is absolutely insane.
Wait, Issa, you guessed that there was 2 people hiding in a bunker underneath the house?
I guess pretty quickly that the
Oh yeah, spoilers.
I have not seen this.
yeah, basically I guess without spoiling, I guess that the person who's taking care of the house had like a secret pretty quickly, and eventually that it was person based. So not so much that hiding people, but yeah, I could see some shit coming more than I thought I would, but I feel that just means that he's really good at setting up stuff. It's the same with Snowpiercer. Like, you can see some stuff coming, kinda, but the execution absolutely blows your mind, so...
Yeah, and I think that's another really important key to, like, world building as well, is, like, knowing your audience and just, like, not treating them like they're stupid. I really don't like comics or books or movies that makes the audience, like, holds the audience's hand. It's like the audience is pretty smart nowadays. Like, and if you respect your audience and just take that into account that they're smart and you should treat them with more respect in the writing in terms of how you divulge information, it's just going to be a better product overall. And that's why I really loved The Invisible.
So good. I want to see it so bad. Someone, please. Well, I can't go until this quarantine stuff is over, but I hope to see it today. Yeah. I think that's it for time. So we ran a bit long, but I think it was really interesting. So, general reminder to everybody in the chat, this is our last stream for this weekend. Oh, but Hiveworks will be doing way more streams. We're planning on doing this regular thing on like a weekly or monthly basis. So if you have topics you're interested in or artists that you would like to hear from, definitely tweet at us for like, oh yeah, do more of this, or like, I'd like to see this creator again. For sure, like anything you want to toss at us, we are always looking for feedback. Reminder again that we are currently having a sale. It should be finishing pretty soon because it was a sale.
Buy my book!
Yeah, and also back Alice in the Nightmare on Kickstarter, and
buy her book!
Buy her book!
Yes, please.
Also,
it's good, I promise.
You can buy Taylor's book on our store with the discount, Spring 2020, so Never Satisfied Book 1. You can also purchase that. It's very good. Look forward to Diana's rebooted Lonely Vincent Billigram. It's gonna kick butt. I'm super excited for that. and also read Namesake by me and Megan.
Yes, please.
It's
Thank
fun.
you.
Other books.
And also
We
you
have
can
good books.
Yeah,
Come
you-
see our wares.
you can
They're
purchase
books
the
about
books. And
books.
we've got pretty solid world building apparently, so that's fun. Thank you so much for tuning in, and as soon as we have dates for future streams, we will post those on Twitter, so definitely follow us, and follow us on Twitch for basically notifications about that. So thank you very much, and have a great end of your weekend.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Stay with you guys.